The letter promised a new beginning, a respectable husband, a comfortable home. What it didn't mention was the blizzard that would nearly claim her life, or that her salvation would come from the most unexpected source. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the extraordinary tale of a mail-order bride who arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fortune sewn into their seams. How far would you go to protect a secret that could mean your survival or your destruction? The year was 1879, when the harshest winter in decades descended upon the Arizona Territory. Silver Creek had seen its share of hardships since the cider mining boom began, but even the oldest settlers couldn't recall snow piling this high or winds cutting this deep. It was a land where survival demanded both grit and grace, qualities Eleanor Wilson had in abundance, though the residents of Silver Creek would take their time discovering this truth. The stagecoach fought its way through the mounting drifts, each lurch sending pain through Ellie's cramped limbs. 3 days of travel had left her exhausted, but it was the knot of anxiety in her stomach that truly tormented her. Everything she owned in the world was either on her body or in the modest carpetbag at her feet. Well, almost everything. "Last stop, Silver Creek," the driver called, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "Can't go no further in this weather, folks. Everybody out." The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple, exchanged concerned glances as the coach rocked violently in a gust. Outside, what should have been a desert landscape had transformed into a blinding white wasteland. Ellie clutched the worn letter in her gloved hand, reading the signature for the 100th time. Franklin Pierce, her future husband, a man who owned the general store, a man of means and standing in this remote community, a man she had never met. "Ma'am?" The driver extended a weather-beaten hand to help her down. "You sure you got business here? This ain't no weather for new arrivals." Ellie nodded, summoning a smile she didn't feel. "I'm expected, sir. Mr. Pierce is meeting me." The driver's expression shifted to something Ellie couldn't quite name. Pity, perhaps, or concern. "Pierce, you say? Well, good luck to you then." Her boots hit the ground with a soft crunch, and instantly the wind tried to tear her woolen coat from her shoulders. She clutched it tighter, feeling the stiff sections where her precious cargo lay hidden in the carefully sewn lining. No one could know. Not yet. Not until she understood what kind of man Franklin Pierce truly was. The stagecoach didn't linger. With a crack of the whip and a shower of snow, it continued down the street, leaving Ellie alone before a weather-beaten sign, Pierce's General Store and Post Office. Taking a deep breath that seared her lungs with cold, Ellie pushed open the door. A bell jangled overhead, announcing her arrival to the handful of people gathered inside. Conversation ceased. All eyes turned to the snow-covered stranger in their midst. "Can I help you, miss?" A thin man with spectacles perched on a hawkish nose approached, his voice clipped with impatience. "I'm looking for Franklin Pierce," Ellie said, struggling to keep her teeth from chattering. "I'm Eleanor Wilson." The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "I'm Franklin Pierce." He looked her up and down, with the same clinical assessment one might give a horse at auction. "You're earlier than expected. The letter said next month." Ellie blinked, confusion momentarily overriding her discomfort. I have your letter here, sir. It clearly states January 15th. "Let me see that." He snatched the paper from her trembling fingers, scanning it with a deepening frown. "This is dated wrong. I specifically requested a February arrival after inventory." A woman emerged from behind the counter, her resemblance to Franklin unmistakable. No, the same sharp features, though hers were arranged in a perpetual expression of disapproval. Is this her, then? The mail-order bride? The word stung more than Ellie had expected, though that's exactly what she was. Hearing it spoken so bluntly made her face burn despite the cold. Yes, Martha, though she's arrived at a most inconvenient time. Franklin handed the letter back to Ellie. My sister, he explained curtly. She keeps house for me. Martha's gaze raked over Ellie, lingering on her worn boots and the frayed edges of her coat. Doesn't look like much, does she? Skinnier than your last correspondence bride? Ellie's spine stiffened. I assure you I'm quite capable of hard work, Miss, Martha corrected sharply. Miss Martha Pierce. An uncomfortable silence fell over the store. The other customers pretended interest in goods on distant shelves. But Ellie could feel their attention, their curiosity about the stranger who had arrived to marry their shopkeeper. Franklin cleared his throat. Well, you're here now, though how we're to manage with this weather and another mouth to feed. He glanced toward the windows, where snow was accumulating with alarming speed. The wedding will have to wait until the preacher can make it through. Reverend Miller lives on the other side of town. I understand, Ellie said, though in truth the delay was a blessing. The man before her bore little resemblance to the considerate gentleman who had penned those letters she now suspected his sister might have written for him. You can stay in the back room for now, Martha said. It's small, but it'll have to do until the weather clears and proper arrangements can be made. Franklin nodded in agreement. Martha will show you. I've got customers. Without another word, he turned away, dismissing Ellie as easily as if she were a child sent out to play. The back room proved to be little more than a storage closet hastily cleared of some of its contents. A narrow cot had been squeezed against one wall, and a washstand with a cracked mirror occupied another. The single window was covered with a threadbare curtain that did little to block the chill seeping through the glass. It ain't the Willard Hotel, but it's dry. Martha placed a candle on the small table. Supper's at 6. Don't be late. Franklin doesn't abide tardiness. When the door closed behind Martha, Ellie finally allowed her shoulders to slump. This wasn't the welcome she had imagined during those long nights on the stagecoach. But then nothing had gone as imagined since her father's death 8 months ago. Henry Wilson had been a dreamer, always chasing the next big strike. What he'd lacked in luck, he'd made up for in foresight. The world isn't kind to lone women, Ellie girl, he'd told her as consumption slowly claimed him. But a smart woman makes her own way. And so he'd sewn his life savings, gold dust and nuggets from his final claim, into the lining of her coat and the hems of her dresses. Keep it hidden, he'd whispered. Trust no one until you're sure they're worthy. Ellie touched the stiff fabric of her coat, feeling the small, hard lumps beneath. She had enough to start a new life, perhaps even open a small shop of her own someday, but a woman alone would be prey to fortune hunters and thieves. She needed protection first, the legitimacy that only marriage could provide in this frontier world. Franklin Pierce had seemed the perfect solution. His letters spoke of a prosperous business, a comfortable home, and a desire for a sensible partnership. Now, faced with the reality of the man himself, doubt crept in like the cold through the ill-fitting window frame. As evening fell, the storm's fury increased. Winds screamed around the corners of the building, and snow piled against the door. The temperature plummeted until Ellie could see her breath even indoors. She made her way to the main room for the promised supper, finding Franklin and Martha already seated at a small table. We don't stand on ceremony here, Franklin said by way of greeting. Serve yourself and sit. The meal was simple: beans, salt pork, and hard biscuits. Ellie ate sparingly, aware of Martha's eyes tracking every bite as if mentally calculating its cost. So, Franklin said, breaking the uncomfortable silence, you can read and write, I assume, given our correspondence. Yes, my father insisted. Good. You'll help with the bookkeeping then. Martha's eyes aren't what they used to be. Martha sniffed. My eyes are fine, Franklin. It's just tedious work. "And you can cook?" he continued, ignoring his sister's protest. "Yes, though I'm better with... You'll take over the kitchen duties as well. Martha has enough to manage with the laundry and cleaning." Ellie nodded, swallowing her frustration. "Of course. I'm happy to contribute." "That's why I advertise for a wife," Franklin said matter-of-factly. "Two women's work for the price of keeping one. It's just good business." The naked calculation in his statement stole what little remained of Ellie's appetite. This wasn't a man seeking partnership. This was a man acquiring labor. "The storm's getting worse," Martha observed, moving to the window. "Franklin, did you check on the storeroom roof? Last big snow, it leaked something terrible." Franklin cursed under his breath. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "No, I was inventorying the new shipment. I'd better have a look." He rose abruptly, taking a lantern from its hook by the door. "You women clear up here." After he left, an uncomfortable silence fell between Ellie and Martha. As they washed the dishes, Ellie ventured a question. "How long have you and your brother lived in Silver Creek, Miss Pierce?" "Going on 15 years now," Martha replied. "Came out after our parents died. Franklin had a good head for business, saw the opportunity when the silver strike hit. We did well while the mines were producing." "And now?" A shadow crossed Martha's face. The big veins played out 3 years back. The town's not what it was. Only the dreamers and the desperate are still digging. She eyed Ellie critically. "Which was your father?" Ellie stiffened. "My father was a practical man." Martha snorted softly. "No practical man ends with his daughter having to sell herself as a mail-order bride." The words hit like a slap. Before Ellie could respond, the back door burst open, bringing with it a flurry of snow and a cursing Franklin. "The roof's gone!" he shouted. "The whole southeast corner collapsed under the weight. Everything in the storeroom is ruined. The flour, the sugar, all of it." "All of it," Martha paled. "But that's our inventory for the month. How will we—" "I don't know," Franklin snapped, flinging his snow-covered hat onto the table. "But I know whose fault it is." His gaze fixed on Ellie. "Bad luck, that's what you've brought. Showing up early, bringing this storm with you." "That's absurd," Ellie protested. "I have no control over the weather." "Coincidence, is it?" His eyes narrowed. "The worst storm in 20 years hits the very day you arrive. I don't believe in coincidences, Miss Wilson." "Franklin, be reasonable," Martha said, though with little conviction. "The girl can't command the clouds." "Maybe not, but she's brought ill fortune all the same." He approached Ellie, looming over her. "I've worked too hard to build this business, to survive in this god-forsaken territory. I won't see it ruined by some bad luck woman." Ellie backed away, her heart hammering. "Mr. Pierce, I understand. You're upset, but surely—" "I've changed my mind," he declared coldly. "The arrangement is off. When the storm breaks, you'll take the first stage out of Silver Creek." But where would I go?" Panic rose in Ellie's throat. "I've spent everything I had on the journey here." Something calculated flickered in Franklin's eyes. "That's hardly my concern, is it? Perhaps you should have planned better." "You can't just abandon our agreement," Ellie said, desperation giving her courage. "I have your letters, your promise." "Promises made under false assumptions," he countered. "I expected a boon to my business, not a harbinger of disaster." Martha laid a restraining hand on her brother's arm. "Franklin, at least wait until the storm passes. We can't send her out in this." For a moment, Ellie thought he might refuse even this small mercy. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine. She can stay until the weather clears. Not a day longer." He stormed off to his quarters, leaving Ellie alone with Martha in the silent kitchen. "You should get some rest," Martha said, not unkindly. "Morning comes early here." Alone in her tiny room, Ellie finally allowed the tears to fall. Everything had gone wrong so quickly. Now she was stranded in a strange town, rejected by the man who was supposed to be her security, with a fortune she dared not reveal. The wind moaned around the building like a living thing, punctuated by creaks and groans as the structure strained against the storm. Through it all, Ellie's mind raced. She needed a new plan. When the storm cleared, she'd have to move on. But to where? The gold would sustain her for a time, but as a woman alone, how long before someone took advantage? Sleep eluded her, and as the night deepened, so did the cold. The small stove in the corner had long since burned out, and Ellie piled her spare clothing atop her blanket for warmth. Still, she shivered uncontrollably. A new sound caught her attention, water dripping, then more dripping, faster now. With growing alarm, Ellie realized the roof above her own tiny room was beginning to leak. She placed her precious carpet bag on the highest shelf and used the wash basin to catch the worst of the drips. But soon, water was seeping in from multiple points. The final straw came with a tremendous crack overhead. Ellie barely had time to leap from the cot before a section of ceiling collapsed, bringing with it a cascade of snow and splintered wood. The freezing deluge soaked her to the skin. Gasping from shock and cold, Ellie staggered to the door. The main part of the store seemed intact, but her room was now exposed to the elements. "Mr. Pierce," she called, pounding on his door. "Miss Martha, the roof has collapsed." No answer came. Either they couldn't hear her over the storm, or they simply didn't care. Shivering violently, Ellie knew she had to act or risk freezing to death. She salvaged what she could: her carpet bag, the coat with its precious cargo, a blanket already stiffening with ice. The front door of the store was barred from the inside, but the back entrance, while partially blocked with snow, yielded. To her desperate shoving, the storm hit her like a physical blow, driving the breath from her lungs. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, and the wind clawed at her wet clothing. Which way? In the whiteout conditions, all directions looked the same. The lights of other buildings were smothered by the storm. Ellie forged ahead, reasoning that any shelter was better than none. Each step was a battle against the wind and deepening snow. Her wet skirts froze around her legs, and her fingers grew numb despite her gloves. How long she struggled, she couldn't say. Time lost meaning in the white void of the blizzard. She thought she glimpsed a light ahead and drove herself toward it, but her strength was failing. Her foot caught on something buried beneath the snow, and she pitched forward, too weak to break her fall. The cold was almost welcome now, a numbing embrace that promised an end to struggle. As consciousness began to slip away, Ellie thought she heard hoofbeats, an impossibility in this storm. Then a dark shape loomed over her, and strong hands lifted her from the snow. "Hold on," a deep voice commanded, barely audible through the shrieking wind. Ellie tried to respond, but her lips wouldn't move. The last thing she remembered was being wrapped in something warm and the steady rhythm of a horse's gait carrying her away from Silver Creek. Heat. That was her first sensation. Upon waking, blessed, wonderful heat on her frozen skin. Ellie opened her eyes to unfamiliar surroundings. She lay on a pallet near a stone fireplace where flames leaped and danced. Thick furs covered her, and her wet clothes had been replaced with a soft buckskin dress. "You're awake. Good." Ellie turned toward the voice, startled to find a man watching her from across the fire. He was unlike anyone she had seen in Silver Creek, tall and powerfully built, with copper skin and eyes so dark they reflected the flames like obsidian. His black hair was pulled back, revealing strong features and a face that spoke of both authority and caution. "Who?" Her voice emerged as a croak. "Joseph Blackhawk," he replied, offering her a cup of something steaming. "Most call me Joe. Drink this. It will help." Ellie hesitated only briefly before accepting the cup. The liquid inside was bitter, but warming, spreading relief through her aching body. "Thank you," she managed after taking a sip. "You saved my life." "It was not wise to travel in such weather," he observed, neither accepting nor rejecting her thanks. "I didn't intend to. My accommodations became uninhabitable." The memory of the collapsing roof returned, along with all that had preceded it. "Where am I?" "My cabin, on the boundary between your people's territory and mine." His phrasing caught her attention. "You're Apache." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face. "Yes, chief of what remains of my band." He gestured to their surroundings. "This is where I live when I must deal with the White Town." Ellie took in the cabin with new eyes. It was small but well built, a curious blend of settler construction and native elements. Woven blankets adorned the walls alongside tools and weapons of both cultures. "How did you find me in the storm?" "I was returning from Silver Creek when I saw something moving in the snow. At first, I thought it was an animal, then I realized it was a fool." Despite everything, a small laugh escaped her. "A fair assessment." Joe's expression softened slightly. "Why were you out in such weather, Miss Wilson?" "Eleanor Wilson. But please, call me Ellie." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. "I came to Silver Creek to marry. The arrangement fell through." You are the mail-order bride Franklin Pierce sent for." Surprise rendered Ellie momentarily speechless. "You know of me?" "Silver Creek is small. News travels, especially unusual news." Joe poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. "Pierce is not known for generosity or patience." "I discovered that rather quickly," Ellie admitted. "And now, what will you do?" It was the question that had tormented her before exhaustion claimed her in the snow. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I have nowhere to go and no means to get there." Her hand instinctively reached for her coat, panic flaring when she didn't find it. "Your belongings are there," Joe said, indicating a small pile near the door. "They are safe." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by caution. "Thank you. You've been very kind to a stranger." "Even Apaches do not leave women to die in snowstorms," he said dryly. "Contrary to what your dime novels might claim." Ellie flushed. "I meant no offense." "None taken." He rose with fluid grace. "You should rest. The storm will not pass for at least another day." As he moved around the cabin, tending to various tasks, Ellie studied him surreptitiously. Despite his forbidding appearance, there was something compelling about Joseph Blackhawk, a quiet dignity that commanded respect. "May I ask you something, Mr. Blackhawk?" "Joe," he corrected. "What is your question?" "Why were you in Silver Creek during such weather?" His hand stilled momentarily. "My people need supplies, medicine. The winter has been hard, and many are sick." "Did Mr. Pierce help you?" Even as she asked, Ellie suspected the answer. A humorless smile touched Joe's lips. "Pierce doubles his prices when he sells to Indians. Today he refused entirely." "That's terrible," Joe shrugged, though tension showed in his shoulders. "It is not unexpected. Few in Silver Creek will deal fairly with Apache." "But that's—" Ellie bit back her protest. Who was she to comment on injustices when she herself was at the mercy of circumstances? Instead, she asked, "What medicine do your people need?" "For fever and cough, the children suffer most." Ellie sat up straighter, wincing at her stiff muscles. "I may be able to help with that. My grandmother was a healer of sorts. She taught me about herbs and remedies." Joe's expression remained guarded, but interest flickered in his dark eyes. "You know medicines?" "Some, yes. If you have certain plants, I could prepare something." She hesitated. "It's the least I can do to repay your kindness." For a long moment, Joe studied her, as if measuring the truth of her words. Finally, he nodded. "Tomorrow, if the storm lessens, we will see what can be gathered." That night, Ellie slept more soundly than she had in months, lulled by the crackling fire and the strange sense of security she felt in this unlikely sanctuary. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she had survived today, and that, she was learning, was victory. Enough on the frontier. Morning brought a temporary lull in the storm's fury. Though snow still fell, the deafening wind had subsided to a whisper. Joe left early, returning with an assortment of plants, some dried, some freshly dug from beneath the snow. "Will these serve?" he asked, laying them before Ellie. She examined each carefully, sorting them by use. "Yes, these will help. Do you have a pot I can use for brewing?" Working together, they prepared medicines, a syrup for coughs, a tea for fevers, and poultices for chest congestion. Ellie explained each step, surprised by Joe's attentiveness and quick understanding. "You've done this before," she observed, as he expertly crushed pine resin for a salve. "My mother was medicine woman to our band," he replied, "before the soldiers came." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken history. Ellie sensed the pain behind it, but didn't pry. Instead, she focused on teaching what she knew, finding unexpected satisfaction in sharing her grandmother's wisdom. As they worked, Joe gradually revealed pieces of his story. He had been educated at an Indian school where they had attempted to kill the Indian to save the man. He had learned the white man's language and ways, only to return and find his. People displaced, their traditional hunting grounds restricted. "Now I walk between worlds," he said, his hands never pausing in their work. "Too Apache for your people, too white for some of mine." "It must be lonely," Ellie said softly. Joe's gaze met hers, surprise evident in his expression. Perhaps at her understanding, or perhaps at his own openness with this stranger. "It is necessary," he replied simply. By afternoon, they had prepared enough medicine for Joe's immediate needs. The storm had intensified again, however, making travel to the Apache camp impossible. "Tomorrow," Joe declared, studying the angry sky. "We try tomorrow." That evening, as they shared a simple meal of venison stew, Ellie found herself sharing her own story, her father's endless quest for the big strike, his final illness, her desperate plan to secure a future through marriage to Franklin Pierce. "You have courage," Joe said when she finished, "to travel so far alone." "Not courage," Ellie corrected. "Necessity." "Often they are the same." He studied her thoughtfully. "What will you do now?" It was the second time he had asked the question, and Ellie still had no answer. Or rather, she had an answer she dared not give. Not yet. The gold sewn into her clothing could provide a new start, but where and how could she use it without inviting danger? "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't stay in Silver Creek, not after what happened with Mr. Pierce." Joe nodded, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Sleep now, tomorrow brings its own path." As Ellie drifted off that night, she realized something startling. In this tiny cabin, with this man from a completely different world, she felt safer than she had since her father's death. It wasn't a feeling she had expected, or one she entirely trusted. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm finally spent. The world outside the cabin was transformed into a sparkling white expanse that hurt the eyes to view directly. Joe prepared his horse for the journey to his people's camp, loading the precious medicines they had made. "What about you?" he asked as Ellie helped secure the bundles. "Where will you go?" Before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Joe tensed, his hand moving to the rifle propped beside the door. "Stay inside," he commanded, but it was too late. 3 riders appeared on the trail leading to the cabin. Franklin Pierce, his sister Martha, and a man Ellie didn't recognize who wore a tarnished sheriff's badge. "There she is," Franklin called, pointing accusingly at Ellie. "And that Apache too, just like I told you, Sheriff." The sheriff dismounted heavily, his hand resting on his holster. Joseph Blackhawk, you're wanted for questioning about the theft of a white woman. Theft? Ellie exclaimed, outraged. He saved my life after your roof collapsed, Mr. Pierce. A likely story, Franklin sneered. We all know what Indians do to white women they capture. Watch your tongue, Joe warned, his voice dangerously soft. The sheriff raised a placating hand. Now let's all stay calm here. Miss Wilson, are you saying you went with the Indian willingly? I didn't go with anyone, Ellie snapped. I was dying in the snow after the roof of Mr. Pierce's storeroom. I collapsed. Mr. Blackhawk found me and brought me here to save my life. And I suppose he dressed you in savage clothes out of the goodness of his heart? Martha interjected, eyeing Ellie's buckskin dress with distaste. Ellie felt heat rise to her face. My clothes were soaked. I would have died of cold without something dry to wear. Convenient, Franklin muttered. The sheriff sighed heavily. Look, miss, even if what you say is true, it doesn't look good. A white woman alone with an Indian, wearing their clothes. Folks will talk. Let them talk, Ellie retorted. I owe Mr. Blackhawk my life. You're coming back to town with us, Franklin declared. I made a mistake sending you away. I'm willing to honor our agreement after all. Ellie stared at him incredulously. You rejected me, called me bad luck, and left me to freeze. Why this sudden change of heart? Franklin shifted uncomfortably. It was a misunderstanding. The storm. I wasn't thinking clearly. But there was something calculating in his eyes that made Ellie wary. She glanced at Joe, who stood watchful and silent, his face an impassive mask. What about the damaged roof? My room was destroyed. We've made repairs, Martha said quickly. Everything's in order now. Something wasn't right. Ellie could feel it. Why would Franklin, who had been so eager to be rid of her, now track her through the snow to reclaim her? I appreciate the offer, Mr. Pierce, but I think it's best if we go our separate ways. Ellie moved closer to Joe, finding reassurance in his steady presence. Franklin's face darkened. You don't have a choice, girl. You came here to be my wife, and my wife you'll be. Actually, I do have a choice, Ellie countered, her voice stronger than she felt. Our arrangement was conditional, and you broke those conditions when you rejected me. Sheriff, Franklin appealed, you can't let her stay with this savage. It's indecent, against God's law. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Miss, he has a point, your reputation. My reputation, Ellie laughed bitterly. Mr. Pierce has already seen to that by announcing to all of Silver Creek that I'm an unwanted mail-order bride who brings bad luck. Now, I never said you said exactly that, Ellie interrupted, and more besides. Martha stepped forward, her expression unexpectedly conciliatory. Miss Wilson, please be reasonable. Whatever my brother said in anger, he's offering you protection now. What future do you imagine for yourself otherwise, especially after this? She gestured vaguely at Joe and the cabin. It was a fair question, one that Ellie had been asking herself. What future did she have? The gold could give her independence, but not protection from a society that viewed lone women with suspicion. I will escort Miss Wilson wherever she wishes to go, Joe said, breaking his silence. To Silver Creek or the next town over, if that is her choice. You'll do no such thing, Franklin blustered. Sheriff, arrest him! The sheriff hesitated. On what charge, Pierce? We've got no evidence he's done anything wrong. He stole my property. I am not your property, Ellie snapped, and I never will be. For a moment, no one spoke. The sun glinted off the snow, creating a dazzling backdrop to the tense standoff. Then, with a deliberate slowness that belied the tension thrumming through him, Joe stepped forward. There is another solution, he said quietly, one that preserves Miss Wilson's honor and resolves this matter. All eyes turned to him. I will marry her myself. The words hung in the crisp air, shocking everyone into silence. Ellie stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "If you are willing," Joe added, his eyes meeting hers, "it would provide the protection you need while you decide your true path." "This is outrageous," Franklin sputtered. "Sheriff, you can't allow this." "Actually," the sheriff interrupted, looking relieved at the potential resolution, "there's no law against it. Unusual, yes, but not illegal." "No white woman would agree to such a thing," Martha declared with certainty. Everyone looked at Ellie, waiting for her response. Her mind raced. Marriage to Joe would be unorthodox, to say the least. She barely knew him. Yet in the short time they had spent together, he had shown more decency and respect than Franklin Pierce had in all his letters. And it would be temporary, she reasoned. Just long enough to secure her position and decide what to do with her inheritance. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Franklin's face contorted with rage. "You'd rather marry a savage than a respectable businessman? Are you mad?" "Perhaps I simply recognize true respect when I see it," Ellie replied. "Sheriff, will you witness our vows?" The sheriff removed his hat, scratching his head in bewilderment. "I suppose I could, though Reverend Miller might be more appropriate." "A simple ceremony is all that's needed," Joe said. "My people's way, with your witness to make it legal in your eyes." Franklin grabbed Martha's arm, yanking her toward their horses. "Come on, this isn't over." He glared at Ellie. "You'll regret this decision, Miss Wilson. Silver Creek has no place for Indian lovers." "Good thing I won't be staying in Silver Creek then," Ellie called after him, a newfound confidence in her voice. As the Pierces galloped away, trailing curses and threats, the sheriff shook his head in disbelief. "You sure about this, miss? It's not too late to change your mind." Ellie glanced at Joe, who waited patiently, his expression giving nothing away. Was she sure? Not remotely. But something told her this leap of faith, however terrifying, was the right path forward. "I'm sure," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The sheriff sighed heavily. "Then let's get this done before I have to explain to the whole in town how I presided over the strangest wedding Silver Creek has ever seen." As Joe began gathering items for the simple ceremony, Ellie wondered what her father would think of this turn of events. Somehow she suspected he might approve. After all, hadn't he always told her that the frontier rewarded those brave enough to forge their own path? And this path, unexpected as it was undeniably her own. The ceremony was unlike anything Ellie could have imagined for herself. No white dress or church bells, no nervous father giving her away. Instead, there was just the crisp mountain air, the glittering snow, and 3 people standing in a small clearing beside Joe's cabin. The sheriff looked profoundly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to another as Joe prepared for the ritual. "Normally, there would be family present," Joe explained, as he arranged various items in a circle. A blanket, a water vessel, pine needles, and small pieces of bread. But the elements themselves can witness. "I don't have family either," Ellie said softly. "Not anymore." Something in Joe's expression softened. "Then we begin our own." The sheriff cleared his throat. "You folks want me to say some Christian words? Seems proper to have something official." "Your presence makes it official in the white man's law," Joe replied. "This ceremony honors the old ways, our commitment to walk the same path, to share, shelter, to protect one another." He held out his hand to Ellie, and after only a moment's hesitation, she placed her fingers in his. His skin was warm despite the cold, his grip firm but gentle. "The 4 directions witness our words," Joe began, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "From where the sun rises to where it sets, from the summer lands to the winter. The earth beneath, the sky above." He guided Ellie to stand with him inside the circle of objects. "We share water," he continued, lifting the small vessel and taking a sip before offering it to her. Ellie drank, the cool liquid soothing her dry throat. We share food. They each took a piece of the bread. We share shelter. Joe wrapped one corner of the blanket around Ellie's shoulders, keeping the other around his own so that they stood connected. In times of plenty and times of need, we walk together. This I promise. The simplicity of the vows struck Ellie with unexpected force. No flowery language, no elaborate promises, just the essential commitment to partnership and survival. It felt more honest than any church ceremony she had witnessed. This I promise, she echoed, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Joe's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, something passed between them. Not romance, perhaps, but understanding. An acknowledgement of the unusual circumstances that had brought them to this point, and a shared determination to make the best of it. "Well," the sheriff said, breaking the moment, "I suppose that'll do." He produced a tattered notebook from his coat pocket. "I'll need to write something in the town records." "Full names?" "Eleanor Margaret Wilson," Ellie supplied. "Joseph Blackhawk," Joe said simply. The sheriff scribbled in his notebook. "I'll put it down as a civil marriage performed under unusual circumstances." He glanced up, his weathered face showing a flicker of compassion. "For what it's worth, I wish you both well. Not everyone will understand this choice." "Few understand choices they wouldn't make themselves," Joe observed. After the sheriff departed, an awkward silence fell between the newly married couple. Ellie stood by the cabin door, suddenly uncertain. Everything had happened so quickly, from near death in the blizzard to this impromptu marriage in less than 3 days. What had she done? "You are troubled," Joe said. Not a question, but a statement. Ellie shook her head. "Not troubled, just overwhelmed. You regret our arrangement already?" "No," she answered honestly. "It was the best option available. I'm grateful." Joe studied her for a moment. "Gratitude is not the foundation I would choose for marriage, but it will serve for..." "Now," he began gathering supplies. "We should travel to my people's camp. The children need the medicine we prepared." The practicality of the statement grounded Ellie. Of course, this wasn't about her uncertainty or their unusual circumstances. There were sick children waiting for help. "How far is the camp?" she asked, moving to assist him. "Half a day's ride in good weather, longer with the snow. Will your people accept me?" The question had been weighing on her mind. Joe secured a bundle to his saddle before answering. "Some will, some won't. Just as in your town." He glanced at her. "My grandmother, she will welcome you. The others will follow her lead." Within the hour, they were mounted on Joe's sturdy horse, Ellie seated behind him, with her arms wrapped awkwardly around his waist. Her carpet bag and coat, with its precious hidden cargo, were secured behind them. As they set off through the snow-covered landscape, Ellie tried to imagine what lay ahead. An Apache camp, a life she had never envisioned for herself. "You're tense," Joe observed, as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. "You won't fall. The horse is sure-footed." "It's not the horse I'm worried about," Ellie admitted. "It's everything else." Joe was quiet for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he chuckled, a low, warm sound she hadn't heard from him before. "Everything else? Yes, that would be concerning." His unexpected humor broke some of the tension. Ellie found herself smiling despite her apprehension. They rode in more comfortable silence after that, the only sounds the creak of leather, the horse's steady breathing, and the soft crunch of snow beneath hooves. The landscape was breathtaking, vast white expanses giving way to pine forests and dramatic cliffs. So different from the mining towns and camps where Ellie had spent most of her life. "It's beautiful," she murmured almost to herself. "Yes," Joe agreed simply. "This is good land, or was, before the miners came searching for silver and the ranchers for grass." "Have your people been here long?" Always, he replied. Though the boundaries of what we call here have shrunk with each passing season. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement of reality. As the day progressed, the trail grew more challenging. They dismounted to lead the horse across a partially frozen stream, the ice cracking ominously beneath their weight. Ellie's borrowed moccasins, while better for the snow than her worn boots had been, began to leak cold water. Her toes numbed, but she said nothing, determined not to slow their progress. Joe noticed anyway. "Your feet are wet," he stated, kneeling to examine her footwear. These were not made for deep snow. Before Ellie could protest, he removed his own outer leggings, additional protection he wore over his buckskin pants, and wrapped them around her feet and calves, securing them with leather thongs. "Now you'll be cold," she objected. "I'm used to it," he replied, already standing and moving on. "You are not." The simple act of kindness touched Ellie deeply. In the world she'd come from, men rarely noticed women's discomfort, let alone acted to alleviate it. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up again, driving needle-sharp crystals of snow into their faces. Joe pulled his horse to a halt, surveying the darkening sky with concern. "Another storm approaches," he said grimly. "We cannot reach the camp before it hits." Ellie followed his gaze to the ominous clouds building on the horizon. "What do we do?" "There is a cave nearby. We used it as a hunting shelter in my youth." He adjusted their course, leading them toward a rocky outcropping barely visible through the increasingly heavy snowfall. The cave, when they reached it, was little more than a deep crevice in the mountainside, but it offered precious protection from the wind. Joe worked quickly to gather wood before the storm made it impossible, while Ellie cleared the cave floor of debris. Within an hour, they had a small fire burning, its light casting long shadows on the stone walls. "We will stay until morning," Joe declared, arranging their limited supplies. "The storm should pass by then." Ellie huddled near the fire, exhaustion settling into her bones. The events of the past few days, the journey to Silver Creek, her rejection by Franklin, the blizzard, her rescue, and now this impromptu marriage, seemed surreal in the flickering firelight. "You should eat," Joe said, offering her dried meat, and a handful of parched corn from his provisions. "Thank you," she accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger. "You're very prepared for emergencies. On this land, lack of preparation means death." He settled across the fire from her. "My father taught me to always carry food, always know where to find shelter." "Your father sounds wise." He was. Joe's expression darkened. "He died defending our hunting grounds from white settlers." Ellie lowered her gaze, a familiar sense of shame washing over her. "I'm sorry. Why? Did you kill him?" The bluntness of the question startled her. "No, of course not." "Then you have nothing to apologize for." Joe poked at the fire. "The past is past. We live now." They ate in silence after that, each lost in private thoughts. The wind howled outside, a haunting reminder of how precarious their situation remained despite the relative safety of the cave. As night fell and the temperature dropped further, Joe rearranged their gear to create makeshift bedding near the fire. "Sleep," he instructed, draping his own blanket over her. "I will keep watch." "You need rest too," Ellie protested. "Later." There was no arguing with his tone. Ellie settled onto the blanket, trying to find a comfortable position on the hard ground. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Every crackle of the fire, every moan of the wind kept her alert and tense. After what felt like hours, Joe's voice came softly through the darkness. "What troubles your sleep?" Ellie sighed, giving up the pretense of rest. "Everything, I suppose. That is too large a burden. Choose one trouble to consider at a time." The practical advice brought a Small smile to Ellie's lips. All right, I'm worried about how your people will receive me. Joe was quiet for a moment, feeding another stick to the fire. My people have suffered much at the hands of whites. There will be suspicion. His eyes met hers across the flames. But you have skills they need. You made medicine. You show respect. These things matter more than the color of your skin. And what about us? Ellie gestured vaguely between them. This marriage. Will they accept that? Some of our men have taken white wives before, usually women captured in raids long ago who chose to stay rather than return to their people. He studied her face. You are different. You came freely, even if out of necessity. Out of necessity, Ellie repeated softly. It was true, yet somehow diminished what had transpired between them. Their arrangement was practical, sensible given the circumstances, but there was also something else, something she wasn't ready to examine too closely. There is no shame in necessity, Joe said, as if reading her thoughts. Many good things begin this way. The simple wisdom of his statement settled something in Ellie's mind. Yes, their marriage was born of necessity, his need to help his people, her need for protection. But perhaps with time, it could become something more. Not a grand romance from ladies' novels, but a partnership of mutual respect and purpose. Thank you, she said after a long silence. Joe raised an eyebrow questioningly. For saving my life, for offering this solution, for... She searched for the right words. For treating me as a person, not a possession. Something shifted in Joe's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight easing of the constant vigilance he maintained. Sleep now, he said, his voice gentler than before. Tomorrow brings its own challenges. This time, Ellie managed to drift into an uneasy slumber, the rhythmic sound of Joe's breathing a curious comfort in the wilderness night. She woke to stillness. The howling wind had died, replaced by a profound quiet that only comes after a heavy snowfall. Joe was already up, checking their supplies and packing efficiently. The storm has passed, he announced. We should reach the camp by midday. Outside, the world was transformed. At least 2 feet of new snow blanketed everything, and the morning sun created a dazzling, pristine landscape that took Ellie's breath away. Their tracks from yesterday had vanished completely, but Joe seemed unconcerned, navigating with the confidence of someone who knew the land intimately. They made good time despite the deep snow, Joe breaking trail, while leading the horse with Ellie mounted. She had offered to walk, but he had insisted she ride, concerned about her already wet footwear. His consideration continued to surprise her. Around noon, they crested a ridge, and Joe halted. There, he said, pointing to a valley below. Ellie followed his gesture and saw the Apache camp for the first time. It was both smaller and more substantial than she had imagined. Perhaps 20 structures were arranged in a rough circle near a frozen stream. Some were traditional wickiups made of brushwood and hides, while others looked more like the cabins built by settlers, though smaller and less finished. Thin columns of smoke rose from several dwellings. It's not what it once was, Joe said, noting her examination. Many of our people were forced onto the reservation 2 summers ago. These are the ones who refused to go. Mostly the old, the young, and those like me who walk between worlds. It looks peaceful, Ellie offered, unsure. What response was appropriate? For now. The words held a weight of history and apprehension that Ellie couldn't fully comprehend. As they descended toward the camp, figures emerged from the dwellings. Children pointed and called out. Adults gathered warily. Ellie felt the weight of their stares as she rode beside Joe, who now walked with the straight-backed confidence of a man who had assumed his rightful place. A very old woman emerged from one of the larger structures, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. Despite her bent posture, there was unmistakable authority in her bearing. The other Apaches deferred to her, stepping aside as she approached. Joe spoke to her in their language, musical sounds that Ellie couldn't begin to decipher. He gestured to the bundles containing the medicine, then to Ellie. The old woman's shrewd eyes never left Ellie's face as Joe explained. Finally, the elder spoke, her voice surprisingly strong for one who looked so frail. Joe translated, "My grandmother welcomes you to our fire. She says any woman who makes medicine for our children is welcome, regardless of her skin." Relief washed over Ellie. She slid down from the horse, wincing as her stiff muscles protested, and approached the old woman with what she hoped was an appropriate show of respect. "Thank you for your welcome," she said, inclining her head slightly. "I'm honored to be here." Joe translated, and the old woman, Naylin, Ellie would later learn was her name, broke into a smile that transformed her weathered face. She reached out and took Ellie's hands in her own, speaking rapidly. "She says your hands are a healer's hands," Joe translated. "Strong but gentle. She can feel it." Before Ellie could respond, a commotion broke out at the edge of the gathering. A man pushed his way forward, shouting angrily in Apache. He was perhaps Joe's age or a bit younger, with a long scar running from his temple to his jaw. His gestures were aggressive, his posture hostile. Joe stepped slightly in front of Ellie, his response measured but firm. The exchange continued, growing more heated. Other members of the tribe began to take sides, some nodding in agreement with the scarred man, others moving to stand near Joe and his grandmother. "What's happening?" Ellie whispered, tension knotting in her stomach. "That is Nanto, son of my father's brother," Joe replied, without taking his eyes off the confrontational man. "He says, I have betrayed our people by bringing a white woman here, that you will bring soldiers, or disease, or both." "I would never. I know." Joe's hand found hers, briefly a reassuring touch. But Nanto lost his wife and daughter to smallpox, brought by white traders. His anger is not without cause. The argument continued until Naylin suddenly rapped her walking stick sharply on the frozen ground. Her voice, when she spoke, silenced everyone. Though Ellie couldn't understand the words, the authority was unmistakable. After a tense moment, Nanto spat on the ground and stalked away, followed by a small group of supporters. The remaining Apaches seemed to relax slightly, though many still regarded Ellie with undisguised suspicion. "What did your grandmother say?" Ellie asked as the crowd began to disperse. "She reminded them that I am chief, that my decisions are for the good of all, and that you have brought medicine we desperately need." A rare smile touched Joe's lips. "She also said any man who questions my choice of wife questions my judgment as leader, and is welcome to challenge me directly if he thinks himself more worthy." "Would Nanto do that? Challenge you?" Joe's expression turned serious again. "Perhaps, but not today. Come, we must distribute the medicine before more children fall ill." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Joe took Ellie to a small wickiup where several children lay on blankets, their faces flushed with fever, their breathing labored. With Naylin's assistance, Ellie prepared doses of the medicines they had brought, showing the old woman how to administer them properly. Despite the language barrier, a kind of understanding developed between Ellie and the Apache healer. Naylin was quick to grasp Ellie's instructions, and in turn demonstrated traditional remedies that complemented what Ellie had prepared. Their collaboration transcended words, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. By evening, the sickest children were already showing improvement, their fevers reduced, their breathing easier. Word spread through the camp, and gradually, more of the Apache people came to observe the white woman who worked alongside their respected elder. Joe had been absent for most of the afternoon, dealing with tribal matters, but he returned as darkness fell. "You have done well," he said, watching as Ellie gently spooned broth into a small boy's mouth. "The children recover." "Your grandmother is a gifted healer," Ellie replied, I've learned as much from her today as she has from me." Joe translated this to Naylin, who cackled with delight and patted Ellie's cheek affectionately. The old woman spoke at length, gesturing between Ellie and Joe with obvious approval. "What is she saying?" Ellie asked when Naylin finally paused for breath. A flicker of embarrassment crossed Joe's face. "She says I have chosen wisely, that you have a strong spirit and good hands, that our children will be," he hesitated, "handsome and clever." Ellie felt heat rise to her cheeks. Children. Of course the tribe would expect that. It was, after all, the natural outcome of marriage. But she and Joe had not discussed such matters, had not even contemplated the more immediate aspects of their arrangement. Naylin, observing Ellie's discomfort, said something else to Joe, her tone gentle but firm. "She says you are tired and should rest," Joe translated, seemingly relieved by the change of subject. "She has prepared a place for us in my dwelling." Us. The word hung in the air between them, a reminder of their new status. Husband and wife, at least in name. But what did that mean here, in this place so different from the world Ellie knew? As if sensing her thoughts, Joe added quietly, "I will sleep elsewhere tonight. You need time to adjust." Relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment mingled in Ellie's chest. "Thank you," she managed. Joe's dwelling turned out to be one of the more substantial structures in the camp, a small cabin built of logs and stone, with a proper door and a smoke hole in the roof. Inside was surprisingly comfortable, with furs covering the packed earth. Floor, woven blankets for bedding, and a small fire already burning in a central pit. "It's lovely," Ellie said, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship evident in the small space. "I built it 3 summers ago," Joe replied, setting down her carpet bag. "When the agent at the reservation tried to force us into government housing, I decided our people needed to see that we could create our own homes, our own way." As he showed her where things were kept, Ellie was struck by how meticulously organized the cabin was. Every item had its place. Every tool was well maintained. It spoke of a methodical mind and careful planning, qualities she hadn't expected but found herself appreciating. "There is water in that vessel," Joe indicated a clay pot near the fire, "and food in the basket. I will return in the morning." As he turned to leave, Ellie suddenly felt a pang of guilt. "This is your home. I shouldn't displace you." Joe paused at the doorway. "It is our home now. But tonight, you need rest more than company." His dark eyes met hers briefly. "Sleep well." Eleanor Wilson Blackhawk. The name, her new name, sounded strange, and yet somehow right when he said it. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts in the firelit cabin. Ellie sank onto the furs, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The events of the past days played through her mind like scenes from someone else's life. How had she come to this place, married to a man she barely knew, surrounded by people who viewed her with suspicion at best and hostility at worst? And yet, there was something compelling about it all. The honesty of Joe's people, their struggle for survival, their deep connection to the land. It resonated with something in Ellie that had always felt stifled in the mining camps and frontier towns of her childhood. As she drifted towards sleep, Ellie's hand instinctively sought her coat, finding reassurance in the small, hard lumps of gold hidden within its lining. Her father's legacy, a fortune that could secure her future if she could find a way to use it wisely. For now, though, the gold remained her secret, one more thing to navigate in a world that had suddenly become far more complex than she had ever imagined. Morning came with a soft tapping at the cabin door. Ellie, who had slept more deeply than she expected on the unfamiliar bedding, sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. "Yes," she called, hastily smoothing her tangled hair. The door creaked open to reveal not Joe but Naylin, carrying a basket and wearing an expectant expression. The old woman said something in Apache, then shook her head in self-correction and carefully formed English words. Come, eat. Touched by the effort, Ellie smiled and nodded. Thank you. Let me just... She gestured to her disheveled appearance, and Naylin chuckled, setting down the basket and making a shooing motion before retreating outside to wait. The basket contained warm cornmeal cakes and dried berries. Simple fare, but welcome to Ellie's empty stomach. She ate quickly, then joined Naylin outside, where pale winter sunlight was just beginning to touch the camp. Using a combination of gestures and the few English words she knew, Naylin indicated that Ellie should accompany her. They made their way through the camp, drawing curious stares from early risers. Children, less inhibited than their elders, ran alongside them, pointing and giggling at Ellie's fair hair and skin. Naylin led her to a small stream that ran at the edge of the camp. Despite the freezing temperatures, a section had been kept clear of ice, presumably for the camp's water supply. The old woman mimed washing, then discreetly withdrew a short distance, keeping her back turned to offer privacy. Grateful for the chance to clean up, Ellie quickly washed her face and hands in the icy water, gasping at the shock, but welcoming the refreshing sensation. As she straightened, patting her skin dry with a small cloth Naylin had provided, she caught sight of movement in the trees beyond the stream. A figure stood watching her, Nanto, the scarred man from yesterday. His posture was tense, his expression unreadable at this distance. When he saw that Ellie had noticed him, he didn't retreat or acknowledge her. He simply continued to stare, with undisguised hostility, before finally turning and disappearing into the forest. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold water ran down Ellie's spine. She hurried back to Naylin, who had also seen the encounter. The old woman's face was grim as she took Ellie's arm, patting it reassuringly while leading her back toward the camp. Nanto, Naylin said, one of the few words they shared understanding of. Then she added something else, accompanying it with a gesture of dismissal. Ellie wished she could ask what it meant, why the man harbored such obvious hatred. But the language barrier remained a frustrating obstacle. They returned to find the camp in full morning activity. Women tended fires and prepared food, men repaired equipment damaged in the recent storms, children carried water and wood under the watchful eyes of elders. It was a scene of communal purpose that reminded Ellie of the mining camps where she'd grown up, though, with a level of organization and cooperation she hadn't often witnessed among settlers. Joe was at the center of it all, moving from group to group, consulting and directing with a natural authority that seemed to require few words. When he spotted Ellie, he excused himself and approached, his expression betraying concern. "You slept well?" he asked, studying her face as if checking for signs of distress. "Yes, thank you. Your grandmother has been very kind." Ellie hesitated, then added, "I saw Nanto watching me at the stream." Joe's jaw tightened. "Did he approach you?" "No, just watched. But it was unsettling. I will speak with him." The quiet promise held both restraint and determination. "I don't want to cause trouble between you and your people," Ellie said. "Quickly, you are not the cause. Nanto's anger existed long before you arrived." Joe glanced toward his grandmother, who was watching their exchange with shrewd eyes. "Today, you will stay with Naylin. Learn what you can from each other. It will help the others accept your presence." The day passed quickly as Ellie worked, alongside Naylin, checking on the sick children and preparing more medicine. The language barrier remained challenging, but they developed a system of gestures and demonstrations that allowed them to communicate essential information. Ellie showed Naylin how to measure doses by the spoonful. Naylin taught Ellie how to identify local plants even in their winter state. By afternoon, word of their successful treatments had spread throughout the camp. more Apache women began to approach, initially wary but increasingly curious about the white woman's methods. Ellie demonstrated simple techniques for reducing fever and easing congestion, while in turn learning traditional remedies that had been passed down through generations. One young mother, bolder than the rest, actually spoke to Ellie in halting English. "My son," she said, pointing to a sleeping boy of perhaps 4 years. "Better now? Thank you." The simple acknowledgement meant more to Ellie than the woman could possibly know. "I'm glad he's improving," she replied with a warm smile. As dusk approached, Joe returned to the cabin, bringing fresh venison and wild onions that some of the men had managed to hunt despite the deep snow. He found Ellie sitting with Naylin, both women grinding herbs with stone mortar and pestle, working in companionable silence. "You have been busy," he observed, setting down his offerings. "Your grandmother is a wonderful teacher," Ellie replied, "and she's very patient with my mistakes." Joe translated, and Naylin cackled with laughter, responding at length in Apache. "She says you learn quickly for a white woman," Joe interpreted, a hint of amusement in his voice, "and that your hands know things your mind has not yet discovered." Ellie wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but she took it as a compliment. Please thank her for me, for her kindness and wisdom. As Joe relayed this, Ellie noticed how his stern features softened when he spoke with his grandmother. The obvious affection between them revealed a side of him she hadn't seen before, the devoted grandson beneath the stoic chief. Naylin eventually took her leave, patting Ellie's cheek affectionately before departing with a significant look at Joe that required no translation. Alone together for the first time since the previous night, an awkward silence fell between the newly married couple. "I will prepare the evening meal," Joe finally said, moving to the fire pit. "Let me help," Ellie offered, relieved to have a task to focus on. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can at least cut vegetables." They worked together quietly, each hyper-aware of the other's movements in the small space. Ellie found herself studying Joe surreptitiously, the sure movements of his hands as he prepared the meat, the straight line of his shoulders, the occasional flash of expression across his usually guarded features. He was handsome, she realized with a start. Not in the way that men in ladies' novels were described, with fine features and elegant bearing. Joe's was a harsher beauty, shaped by sun and wind and struggle. His face told a story of endurance, of a man who had seen too much too young and survived by sheer force of will. "You are staring," he observed without looking up from his work. Heat rushed to Ellie's cheeks. "I'm sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" The direct question caught her off guard. "About how strange life can be. A week ago, I was traveling to marry a man I'd never met. Now I find myself married to a completely different man I'd also never met." Joe glanced up, a flicker of humor in his dark eyes. "Life on the frontier is unpredictable." "That's certainly true," Ellie smiled despite herself. "Though I'm beginning to think my father was right about one thing." "What was that?" "He always," said fate, "has a way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even if it's not where you planned to go." Joe considered this as he added ingredients to the cooking pot. "Your father sounds like a man who understood the world. In some ways, in others," Ellie sighed. "He was a dreamer, always chasing the next big strike, certain that fortune waited just over the next hill." Did he find it? This fortune? The question brought Ellie's hand instinctively to her coat, which hung nearby. Not in the way he hoped. Joe noticed the gesture but didn't comment. Instead, he said, "Dreams keep us alive when reality would crush our spirits. There is value in that." The simple wisdom of the statement resonated with Ellie. Her father's dreams had indeed sustained them through difficult times, providing hope when their circumstances offered little. As they ate the savory stew Joe had prepared, Ellie found herself relaxing slightly. The food was delicious, the fire warm, and despite the strangeness of her situation, she felt safer than she had in months. "Tell me about your people," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Not just now, but before, when you were a child." Something in Joe's expression shifted. Not quite pain, but a deep, abiding sadness. For a moment, Ellie thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that reminded her of the marriage ceremony. "We were the people of the mountain springs," he said. "Hunters who followed the deer and the elk, gatherers who knew every plant that grew in our territory. We moved with the seasons, summer camps in the high country, winter settlements in the valleys where game sheltered from snow." He described a life in harmony with the land, where children learned to read the sky for weather, to track animals, to respect the delicate balance of their world. He spoke of ceremonies that marked the turning of seasons, of storytelling by winter fires, of the wisdom passed down by elders. "It sounds beautiful," Ellie said softly when he paused. "Peaceful." It was. Joe's gaze was distant, seeing something far beyond the cabin walls. Until the silver was discovered. His narrative shifted then, recounting the influx of miners and settlers, the growing tensions, the broken treaties. The army came next, forcing many Apache bands onto reservations where disease and despair claimed more lives than bullets ever had. My father resisted. He led those who refused to surrender our way of life. Pride and grief mingled in Joe's voice. He died defending our right to live as we always had. "I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate for the scale of the loss. After his death, I was sent to the white man's school. They cut my hair, forbade our language, taught me to read their books and speak their words. His expression hardened. They thought they could erase who I was, make me into something else. But they failed, Ellie observed. A ghost of a smile touched Joe's lips. Yes, they failed. When I returned, I found what remained of our band. Those too old, too young, or too stubborn to go to the reservation. I brought what I had learned of the white man's ways to help them survive in this new world. That's why you speak English so well, why you understand both worlds. Joe nodded. It is a burden and a gift. I walk between, belonging fully to neither world. He studied Ellie's face in the firelight. But perhaps that is why I understood your situation. You too are caught between, no longer who you were, not yet certain of who you will become. The observation struck Ellie with its accuracy. Yes, she admitted quietly, that's exactly how it feels. Then we are well matched, at least in this. Joe rose, gathering their empty bowls. Tomorrow I must meet with the council elders. We face decisions about the coming months, whether to remain here or move deeper into the mountains. Because of me? Ellie asked, sudden guilt washing over her. No, because of many things. The winter has been harsh, game is scarce, and there are rumors of cavalry patrols searching for renegade bands. His expression darkened. That is what they call us now, renegades, for refusing to die quietly on their reservations. The bitterness in his voice revealed wounds deeper than Ellie could fully comprehend. She had heard stories, of course, everyone on the frontier had, about the Indian problem and the government's efforts to solve it. But hearing Joe's perspective cast those tales in a different light. What can I do to help? She asked. Surprise flickered across Joe's features. You have already done much. The children recover because of your medicines. I want to do more. If I'm to be part of this community, even temporarily, I should contribute. Joe considered her for a moment. Your willingness does you credit. For now, continue working with Naylin. The people respect her judgment. If she accepts you, others will follow. He paused. And Perhaps teach some of the women your language. Many understand a little English, but fear using it. I'd be happy to, Ellie said, relieved to have a concrete way to make herself useful. As they prepared for sleep, the awkwardness between them returned. Joe laid out additional furs near the fire, clearly intending them for himself, while leaving Ellie the more comfortable sleeping platform. "You should take your bed," Ellie protested. "I'm smaller. I'll be fine by the fire." "No," Joe's tone was firm but not unkind. "You are unaccustomed to sleeping on hard ground, and the nights grow colder." There was no arguing with his logic. Still, as Ellie settled onto the platform, guilt nagged at her. This arrangement couldn't continue indefinitely. The cabin was too small, and certainly the tribe would expect more normal marital relations eventually. That thought sent a flutter of apprehension through her stomach. Joe was essentially a stranger, despite their hasty marriage. He had been nothing but respectful. But the prospect of greater intimacy was daunting. Such concerns were premature, Ellie reminded herself firmly. For now, they had a practical arrangement that served both their needs. The future would unfold, as it would. Sleep claimed her eventually, but her dreams were troubled. Vague threats lurking in blizzard winds, Franklin Pierce's accusing face, and gold coins slipping through her fingers like water. She woke to find Joe already gone, the cabin neat and a small fire burning. Outside, voices carried on the crisp morning air, a gathering of some kind. Ellie dressed quickly in the buckskin dress Naylin had provided, no longer feeling self-conscious in the unfamiliar garment. It was warm and practical, far better suited to life in the camp than her own clothes would have been. As she stepped outside, Ellie immediately sensed tension in the air. A group of Apache men had formed a loose circle near the center of the camp. Joe stood addressing them, his posture rigid, his face set in stern lines. Though she couldn't understand the words, the gravity of the discussion was evident. Naylin appeared at Ellie's side, her weathered face troubled as she watched the proceedings. "Bad news," she said in her limited English, pointing toward the gathering. "Soldiers." Before Ellie could ask for clarification, the discussion among the men grew more heated. Nanto, the scarred man who had watched her at the stream, was speaking. Now, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated. He pointed directly at Ellie, his expression hostile. Joe's response was immediate and forceful. He stepped toward Nanto, speaking in low, measured tones that nonetheless carried authority. Whatever he said caused a murmur among the gathered men. Some nodded in agreement, others looked uncertain. Naylin tugged at Ellie's sleeve, pulling her toward the area where the sick children were recovering. "Come, help now, men talk." Though burning with curiosity and concern, Ellie followed the old woman's guidance. As they checked on the patients, she tried to extract more information. "Naylin, please, what's happening? What about soldiers?" The old woman's face grew grave. "Bluecoats come, search for Apache, 3 days from here." She made a sweeping gesture with her arm. "Take all to reservation." Ellie's heart sank. "Because of me? Did someone from Silver Creek tell them about Joe's band?" Naylin shook her head, but her expression remained troubled. "Not you. Hunters see soldiers. Many soldiers." She pointed to Nanto, visible in the distance, still arguing with other men. "He say you bring bad luck. Say you tell soldiers we are here." "That's ridiculous. I would never betray Joe or any of you." Indignation flared in Ellie's chest. How could he think that? Nanto lose wife, baby girl to white man's sickness, heart full of anger. Naylin's eyes, despite her age, were sharp and perceptive. He looked for reason to hate. The explanation didn't excuse Nanto's accusations, but it made them more comprehensible. Grief could warp even the soundest mind, and the man had suffered losses Ellie could scarcely imagine. The council continued for most of the morning, but Ellie kept her distance, focusing instead on her duties with the children. By midday, a decision appeared to have been reached. The camp burst into activity, people packing belongings and dismantling the more temporary structures. Joe found her helping a young mother prepare travel bundles. "We must move," he said without preamble. "The army sends patrols to round up hostiles before spring. Naylin told me." Ellie straightened, searching his face. "Is it because of me? Did my presence somehow alert them?" "No." Joe's denial was firm. "The cavalry has been searching all winter. It was only a matter of time before they found sign of us." He glanced around the camp. "We move deeper into the mountains. There are caves, hidden valleys where we can wait out the worst of the weather." "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn. The children who are still too weak to travel will go first with the elders. The rest will follow, removing all traces of our presence here." His expression grew more serious. "It will be dangerous, Eleanor. The journey is difficult even in good weather." The use of her full name emphasized the gravity of the situation. "I understand," she said. "Tell me what I need to do." Relief flickered briefly in Joe's eyes, as if he had expected resistance. "Pack only what is essential. Help Naylin prepare the medicines. We will need them." As he turned to go, Ellie caught his arm. "What about Nanto? He thinks I'm somehow responsible for this." Joe's jaw tightened. "Nanto's grief speaks louder than his reason. I have reminded him that as chief, my word is final. You are under my protection." The declaration should have been reassuring, but something in Joe's tone suggested the matter was far from resolved. Still, Ellie had no choice but to trust him. Her fate was now inextricably linked with his and his people's. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Following Joe's instructions, Ellie packed only the essentials, her carpet bag and the precious coat with its hidden treasure. Everything else could be left behind or replaced. As darkness fell, an air of tense anticipation settled over the camp. Families gathered in small groups, sharing hushed conversations and simple meals. Children were quieter than usual, picking up on their parents' anxiety. Joe was absent for most of the evening, coordinating the evacuation with other tribal leaders. When he finally returned to the cabin, exhaustion was evident in the slump of his shoulders. "You should rest," Ellie said, gesturing to the sleeping platform she had prepared for him. "You'll need your strength tomorrow." To her surprise, Joe didn't argue. He sank onto the furs with a barely suppressed groan, rubbing a hand over his face. "The first group leaves before sunrise. The children, the elders, those too weak to move quickly. I've assigned our strongest warriors to protect them." "And the rest of us?" "We follow once we've removed all signs of the camp. The snow will help conceal our trail, but we must be thorough." Joe's eyes met hers. "You will go with the first group. Naylin will need your help with the children." Ellie nodded, relief mingling with a strange reluctance to be separated from Joe. "How long before you join us?" "A day, perhaps 2 if the weather turns." He studied her face in the dim firelight. "You are not afraid?" "I'd be a fool not to." Ellie admitted, "but I trust you and Naylin." A small smile touched her lips. "Besides, I've already survived one blizzard this winter. What's another mountain trek?" Joe didn't return the smile, his expression remaining somber. "This is not the life you sought when you came west." "No," Ellie agreed softly, "but few of us find exactly the life we seek." She hesitated, then added, "My father used to say that life is what happens while you're making other plans." "Your father was wise in this." Joe's eyes drifted closed, fatigue finally claiming him. "Wake me before dawn," he murmured, already half asleep. Ellie watched as his breathing deepened and evened out. In sleep, the constant vigilance left his features, making him appear younger, less burdened. How old was he? She wondered. Probably not much older than her own 22 years, yet responsibility had aged him beyond his time. Morning came too, quickly, The eastern sky still dark when Ellie woke to prepare for departure. Outside, the camp was already stirring, final preparations being made in hushed voices. The weakest children were bundled onto travois, simple stretchers that could be pulled through the snow, while the elders gathered what few possessions they could carry. Joe joined Ellie as she secured her coat and carpet bag. "Stay close to Naylin," he instructed. "She knows the mountain paths better than anyone." "I will." Ellie hesitated, suddenly aware that this might be their last moment alone for some time. "Joe, She faltered, unsure what she wanted to say. He waited, his dark eyes searching her face. "Thank you," she finally managed. "For everything." Something softened in Joe's expression. "There is no need for thanks between us. We face this together now." He reached out, his hand hovering briefly near her cheek before dropping back to his side. "Be safe, Eleanor." With that, he was gone, striding toward the warriors who would remain behind to disguise the camp's existence. Ellie watched him go, an unidentifiable emotion tightening her chest. "Come!" Naylin appeared at her side, her ancient face resolute despite the difficult journey ahead. "We go now." The first group departed just as dawn broke, a solemn procession winding its way up a nearly invisible trail into the mountains. Ellie helped Naylin with one of the travois, the two women pulling together to navigate the difficult terrain. The going was slow, each step requiring careful placement to avoid hidden obstacles beneath the snow. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley where the camp had stood. From this distance, Ellie could see small figures, moving about, dismantling the last structures, scattering debris to make it appear as if no one had ever lived there. Joe would be among them, she knew, overseeing the final stages of the evacuation. "We rest here," Naylin announced, pointing to a sheltered outcropping. "Eat, children need strength." The brief stop allowed them to share a simple meal of pemmican and dried berries. Ellie checked on the sickest children, relieved to find them, faring better than she had feared. The cold was a concern, but the Apache had wrapped them expertly in furs, creating cocoons of warmth despite the harsh conditions. As they prepared to continue their journey, Ellie noticed one of the older girls, watching her with open curiosity. Unlike some of the others, this child showed no fear of the white woman in their midst. "Hello," Ellie said, smiling gently. "My name is Ellie. What's yours?" The girl hesitated, then replied in careful English, "Nada. It means cornflower." "That's a beautiful name," Ellie said, delighted by the unexpected connection. "Did you learn English at school?" Nada shook her head. "My father teach me. He say I must know white man words to survive." The simple statement carried a weight far beyond the girl's years. Ellie felt a surge of admiration for this child who faced such harsh realities with apparent acceptance. "Your father is very wise," she said. "Perhaps you can help me learn your language too. It would be a fair trade." Nada's face brightened at the suggestion. "Yes, I teach you. You teach me more English. Good trade." Their conversation was cut short as Naylin signaled it was time to move on. But as they resumed their arduous journey, Nada stayed close to Ellie, occasionally offering Apache words for things they passed: tree, rock, sky, snow. The simple language lesson provided welcome distraction from the increasingly difficult terrain. As they climbed higher, the trail narrowed, in some places barely wide enough for the travois to pass. Sheer drops fell away on one side, while the mountain rose steep and unforgiving on the other. "Careful here," Naylin warned as they approached a particularly treacherous section. "Ice under snow, very dangerous." Ellie nodded, testing each step. Before committing her weight, despite their caution, progress slowed to a crawl as the entire group navigated the hazardous passage. They were halfway across when disaster struck. One of the elders, an ancient man leaning heavily on a walking stick, slipped on a patch of invisible ice. His cry of alarm was cut short as he pitched sideways toward the drop. Without thinking, Ellie lunged for him, abandoning her end of the travois to grab the old man's arm. The sudden movement threw her off balance on the narrow trail. For one terrible moment, she felt herself falling, the void opening beneath her feet. Then strong hands seized her coat, yanking her back from the brink. Nada's father, a tall warrior, who had been walking behind them, had reacted with lightning speed to save both Ellie and the elder. "Thank you," Ellie gasped, heart pounding as they all regained secure footing. The man nodded curtly, his expression unreadable. But after that, he stayed closer to Ellie and Naylin, offering silent assistance whenever the trail grew particularly challenging. By nightfall, they had reached their first destination, a system of caves set into the mountainside, invisible from below. Here, Naylin explained, they would rest for the night before continuing to the hidden valley that was their ultimate goal. The caves, while cold and damp, offered blessed shelter from the wind that had begun to howl as darkness fell. Small fires were cautiously lit, providing minimal heat and light while producing little smoke that might betray their position. Ellie collapsed near one such fire, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. The day's journey had been the most physically demanding experience of her life, yet despite her fatigue, a sense of accomplishment filled her. She had kept pace, had pulled her weight, literally in the case of the travois, and had even saved an elder from potential disaster. Naylin settled beside her, offering a wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid. "Drink," she commanded. "Give strength." The beverage was bitter but warming, spreading relief through Ellie's aching body. "Thank you," she said gratefully. "How much farther to the valley?" "Half-day walk. Easier path than today." Naylin's shrewd eyes studied Ellie's face. "You do? Good, strong woman." The simple praise meant more coming from the respected elder than elaborate compliments ever could. "I'm trying," Ellie replied honestly. "Try good. Do better." Naylin gestured around the cave at the resting Apache. "They see you help. They remember." Ellie followed her gaze, noticing that while some still regarded her with suspicion, others nodded respectfully or offered small smiles. The shift in attitude was subtle but unmistakable. Nada approached, carrying a bundle of furs. "For you," she said, presenting them to Ellie. "My mother say you need warm sleep." Touched by the gesture, Ellie thanked the girl and her mother, who watched from a short distance away. As she arranged the furs into a makeshift bed, Ellie reflected on how quickly her circumstances had changed. A week ago, she had been a mail-order bride, heading toward what she hoped would be security and respectability. Now she was a fugitive in the mountains, married to an Apache chief, fleeing from the very government she had once counted on for protection. Yet despite the danger and uncertainty, Ellie couldn't honestly say she would choose differently if given the chance. Something about this harsh existence felt more genuine, more purposeful than the life she had envisioned for herself. These people, fighting to preserve their way of life against overwhelming odds, displayed a courage and dignity that commanded respect. Sleep came quickly that night, deep and dreamless, despite the hard stone floor and the strange surroundings. Ellie woke to find the cave already bustling with activity as the group prepared for the final leg of their journey. Nada's mother, Kiona, Ellie learned was her name, approached with a small offering of food. "Eat," she said, her English halting, but clear. "Long walk today." "Thank you," Ellie replied, accepting the simple meal gratefully. "Your daughter is teaching me some Apache words. Perhaps you could help me too." The request seemed to please Kiona, who nodded eagerly. "Yes, good you learn. My husband say you save his father yesterday." She pointed to the elder Ellie had grabbed. "On the treacherous trail. He very important man, medicine keeper." The revelation placed the incident in new perspective. No wonder Nada's father had been so quick to assist. The elder was his own parent, and apparently someone of significance within the tribe. "I just reacted," Ellie said modestly. "Anyone would have done the same." Kiona shook her head. "Not anyone. You risk fall to save him. Brave." She touched Ellie's hand briefly. "My husband say thank you." The gesture, small as it was, represented an important shift. Through one instinctive act, Ellie had earned the gratitude of at least one family among the Apache, a family that, she was beginning to realize, held considerable influence within. The band. The day's journey proved less arduous than the previous one, though still challenging for someone unaccustomed to mountain travel. The trail wound through dense pine forests where the snow lay deep in drifts, then across rocky plateaus. Swept clear by wind, always they climbed, moving higher into the rugged wilderness. By early afternoon, they crested a ridge, and Ellie got her first glimpse of their destination. Nestled between towering peaks lay a sheltered valley, protected from the worst of the winds and hidden from casual observation. A frozen stream meandered through its center, and clusters of pine and fir offered natural shelter. "Winter camp," Nayland explained, pointing toward the valley. "Good place, safe place." Ellie could see why the Apache had chosen it. The surrounding mountains created a natural fortress, with only a few narrow approaches that could be easily defended or obscured. Game would be drawn to the relative shelter of the valley, providing hunting opportunities even in winter, and the dense trees would supply both firewood and building materials for more permanent structures. They descended carefully, reaching the valley floor by late afternoon. Though no permanent dwelling stood ready, it was clear the Apache had used this location before. Fire pits ringed with stones waited beneath the trees, and in some places, frameworks for wiki-ups remained from previous stays. Work began immediately to establish the camp. The children and elders were settled in the most protected spots, while the able-bodied adults constructed temporary shelters. Ellie worked alongside. Kiona and other women, gathering pine boughs for bedding and helping to erect simple structures that would keep out the worst of the cold. By evening, the camp had taken basic shape. Fires burned in the stone circles, and the weakest members of the band were safely sheltered. Hunting parties had even managed to bring down 2 deer, ensuring fresh meat for at least a few days. Exhausted, but satisfied, Ellie sat near one of the fires, watching as Nayland showed younger women how to prepare the venison for smoking. The old woman's gnarled hands moved with practiced efficiency, wasting nothing of the precious resource. "You have settled in well." The voice behind her made Ellie start. She turned to find Nada's father standing there, his expression more open than she had yet seen from any of the Apache men besides Joe. "I'm trying to be useful," she replied, gesturing for him to join her if he wished. After a moment's consideration, he sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "I am Takoda," he said. "It means friend to all." "I'm Eleanor Wilson." She hesitated, then added, "Black Hawk now, I suppose?" A ghost of a smile touched Takoda's stern features. "Yes, you are Joe's wife. This gives you place among us, even if some do not yet accept it." He gazed into the fire. "But saving my father's life, that gives you something more. Respect is earned, not given." "I didn't do it to earn respect," Ellie said honestly. "It was just instinct. Good instincts reveal a person's true nature." Takoda studied her with keen eyes. "My daughter likes you. She says you wish to learn our language." "I do. It seems only fair since I'm living among your people." Takoda nodded approvingly. "My wife and daughter will teach you, and I will tell others of what you did on the mountain. It may help with those who still doubt your place here." The offer represented more than just language lessons or favorable words. It was acceptance, perhaps even the beginning of friendship. Precious, currency in a community where Ellie remained an outsider despite her marriage to their chief. "Thank you," she said simply. "I would be grateful for both." Takoda rose with the fluid grace that seemed characteristic of the Apache warriors. Rest. Now, tomorrow brings its own challenges. As he walked away, Ellie reflected on how rapidly alliances could form in times of crisis. A single act, grabbing an elder's arm without thought for her own safety, had opened doors that might otherwise have remained firmly closed. The following day brought both hard work and unexpected developments. As the camp continued to take shape, sentries were posted on the surrounding ridges to watch for any sign of pursuit. Hunting and gathering parties ventured out in various directions, carefully obscuring their trails as they returned. Ellie divided her time between caring for the recovering children and helping to establish more permanent shelters. Kiona and Nada included her in their activities, providing simple Apache phrases as they worked. By midday, Ellie could recognize and repeat basic terms for common objects and actions. It was during a brief rest that a sentry's warning call echoed through the valley. Instantly, the camp froze, all eyes turning toward the ridge where the warrior stood signaling. "Riders," Takoda translated for Ellie, his expression grim. "Coming from the direction of our old camp." Fear rippled through the group. Had they been discovered so quickly? Were the soldiers already on their trail? But as the sentry continued his signals, Takoda's stance relaxed slightly. "It is our people," he announced. "Joe brings the rest of the band." Relief washed over Ellie, stronger than she had expected. She hadn't realized how worried she'd been about Joe and those who remained behind until that moment. The second group arrived an hour later. Tired but triumphant, they had successfully erased all evidence of the camp and had traveled hard to reach the valley before another storm that was building on the horizon. Joe found Ellie helping to prepare a meal for the new arrivals. For a brief moment, something like warmth flickered in his eyes when he saw her. "You made it safely," he said. His tone revealing his relief was as genuine as hers had been. "Yes, though there was one close call on the mountain trail." Ellie glanced toward the elder she had saved. Fortunately, Takoda was there to help. "I heard." Joe's expression became thoughtful. "That was well done, Eleanor. Such actions speak louder than any words could." Coming from him, the praise felt especially significant. Joe was not a man who offered empty compliments. "The valley seems like a good place to wait out the winter," Ellie observed, changing the subject. "Naylin says it's well protected." "It has served us before." Joe gazed around at the burgeoning camp. "But we cannot stay indefinitely. Game will become scarce, and the army may yet find us." "What then?" Joe sighed, the weight of leadership evident in his posture. "In spring, we must make a difficult choice. Try to reach the reservation where conditions are poor, but there is some safety, or push farther into the mountains away from white settlements." "Neither option sounds ideal," Ellie said carefully. "There are no ideal options left for my people, only different forms of surrender." The bitterness in Joe's voice was palpable but controlled. "But that decision is for tomorrow. Today, we focus on survival." As darkness fell, the reunited band gathered around the central fires. Though fatigue marked every face, there was also quiet satisfaction at having escaped detection, at having once again outmaneuvered those who sought to confine them. Joe took his place in the center of the gathering, speaking words in Apache that Ellie couldn't understand but whose cadence suggested ritual or ceremony. Others responded, their voices blending in what seemed to be affirmation or agreement. Naylin leaned close to Ellie, whispering translations. He thanks the spirits for safe journey, asks for protection through winter, honors those who helped. Others. To Ellie's surprise, Joe then mentioned her name, gesturing in her direction. A murmur ran through the assembled Apache, not hostile but curious. "What is he saying about me?" Ellie whispered to Naylin. "He say you save elder, show courage of Apache woman." Naylin's wrinkled face creased in a smile. "Good words. Make people think maybe white woman not so bad." The ceremony continued, evolving into stories and even some singing as the night deepened. Though Ellie couldn't follow most of it, she found herself drawn into the rhythm and emotion of the gathering. This was community in its most elemental form, people bound together by shared struggle and purpose, finding strength in unity. Later, as the fires burned low and families began to retire to their shelters, Joe approached Ellie where she sat, with Naylin. "I have prepared a place for us," he said, indicating a small but sturdy wicky upset slightly apart from the others. "It is not as comfortable as the cabin, but it will keep out the cold." The implication was clear. Unlike at the cabin, here they would be sharing quarters without the luxury of separate sleeping areas. The practical necessity of it was obvious, given the limited space and resources, but Ellie still felt a flutter of nervousness. Naylin, observing their exchange with knowing eyes, patted Ellie's hand reassuringly before taking her leave with a string of Apache words Ellie couldn't decipher. "What did she say?" Ellie asked as she gathered her belongings to follow Joe. A rare hint of embarrassment crossed his features. "She said that winter nights are cold, and shared warmth is a blessing from the spirits." "Oh." Heat rose to Ellie's cheeks, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "I see." The wickiup was small but well constructed, with thick branches forming a sturdy framework covered by hides and canvas. Inside, Joe had arranged furs and blankets to create a comfortable sleeping area, with their few possessions neatly stored along one side. Ellie hesitated at the entrance, suddenly acutely aware of the intimacy the space imposed. Joe seemed to sense her discomfort. "I can sleep elsewhere, if you prefer," he offered quietly. The offer was genuine and considerate, but Ellie was also aware of appearances and expectations. They were married, at least in name. Separate sleeping arrangements might be accepted temporarily, but eventually would raise questions among the tribe. And beyond the practical considerations, there was something else. A growing trust in this man who had repeatedly demonstrated his honor and respect. If they were to build any kind of genuine partnership, even a temporary one, certain barriers would have to come down. "No," she said finally. "This is fine. We're husband and wife after all. At least on paper." Joe nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. On paper, and by Apache law. They prepared for sleep with careful courtesy, each maintaining what little privacy the small space allowed. When they finally lay down on opposite sides of the wickiup, Ellie was intensely conscious of Joe's presence just feet away. The sound of his breathing, the occasional shift of his body on the furs. "Sleep well, Eleanor," he said softly. "You too, Joe." Despite her nervousness, exhaustion soon pulled Ellie towards sleep. Her last conscious thought was that for all the danger and uncertainty surrounding them, she felt strangely secure in this makeshift shelter with this most unexpected of husbands keeping watch through the night. Days in the hidden valley settled into a rhythm dictated by necessity and survival. Each morning, Ellie woke at dawn alongside Joe, their initial awkwardness gradually giving way to a quiet routine. They would share a simple meal before separating for their respective duties, Joe coordinating hunting parties and defenses, Ellie working with Naylin and the other women to maintain the camp and care for the children. The Apache continued to eye her with varying degrees of acceptance. Some, like Dakota's family, had genuinely welcomed her into their circle. Others maintained a wary distance, their gazes following her movements with lingering suspicion. And then there was Nanto, whose hostility remained undiminished, though he kept it leashed beneath a cold civility that Joe's position demanded. 2 weeks after their arrival in the valley, Ellie was gathering pine needles for a medicinal tea when she became aware of someone watching her. Looking up, she found Nanto standing at the edge of the clearing, his scarred face impassive. "Hello," she said cautiously, straightening from her work. He didn't respond immediately, studying her with dark eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his English was precise and surprisingly fluent. "You learn our ways quickly for a white woman." The observation held neither compliment nor criticism, merely an acknowledgement of fact. Ellie nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected overture. "Naylin is a good teacher," she finally replied. "Yes, she taught me also, many years ago." Nanto moved closer, his gaze shifting to the pine needles she had collected. "Those are good, fresh. You chose well." The approval, however grudging, caught Ellie by surprise. "Thank you. I'm still learning which plants keep their properties through winter." Nanto nodded, then abruptly changed the subject. "Why are you here, Eleanor Blackhawk?" The directness of the question was startling, as was his use of her married name, the first time he had acknowledged her union with Joe in any way. "Circumstances brought me here," she answered carefully. "I had nowhere else to go." "Circumstances." He repeated the word as if testing its truth. "Not choice." "Not at first," Ellie admitted honestly. "But now I would choose to stay, at least for a while." "Why?" The simple question demanded a more complex answer than Ellie was prepared to give, especially to this man who had so openly resented her presence. But something told her that honesty, not diplomacy, was required here. "Because your people have shown me more genuine community in 2 weeks than I found in years among my own," she said finally. "Because despite having every reason to reject me, many of you have offered acceptance instead. And because—" she hesitated, then finished softly, "because Joe has treated me with more respect as his wife in name than the man who actually sent for me as his bride." Nanto's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but perhaps a fraction less hostility. "My wife was called Ista," he said unexpectedly. "It means snow in our language. She was laughing when I first saw her, dancing in the season's first snowfall." A shadow crossed his features. "The white doctor at the trading post refused to treat her when the coughing sickness came, said he didn't waste medicine on savages." Ellie felt a stab of genuine horror. "That's monstrous. I'm so sorry." "I do not want your sorrow," Nanto replied, his voice hardening. "But I will accept your help for our people. Takoda says you have knowledge of healing. This is useful." It wasn't friendship or even forgiveness, but it was an acknowledgement of her value to the band. Coming from Nanto, that represented significant progress. "I'll help however I can," Ellie promised. Nanto gave a short nod, then turned to leave. Before he disappeared among the trees, he looked back. "Be careful gathering alone. The valley is safer than most places, but not without dangers. Joe would be displeased if harm came to you." The warning was delivered without particular concern for her welfare, but the fact that he had offered it at all spoke volumes. Ellie watched him go, mulling over the exchange. Perhaps time would never fully heal Nanto's wounds or erase his distrust of white people, but this small connection, born of mutual respect for healing knowledge, was a start. When she returned to camp and related the incident to Naylin, the old woman nodded sagely. "Nanto begin to see you, not just white woman," she explained. "Good step, small but good." Small steps seemed to define Ellie's integration into the Apache band. Each day brought minor victories, a new word mastered, a skill improved, another face that offered a smile instead of a guarded stare. She found herself learning constantly, absorbing not just the language, but the rhythms and values of a culture so different from her own. Jo observed these changes with quiet approval, though they spoke little of personal matters. Their conversations centered on practical concerns, the camp's needs, weather patterns, decisions about resource allocation. Yet even this limited interaction was evolving, becoming less formal, more genuine. Jo had begun to genuinely seek her counsel on certain issues, particularly those involving health or diplomacy. One evening, as they sat in their wiki-up after a long day, Jo surprised her by asking, "Are you content here, Eleanor?" The question came so unexpectedly that Ellie found herself momentarily speechless. Was she content? It wasn't a consideration that had occupied her thoughts. Survival had been her primary focus, adapting to new circumstances her main concern. She searched for the right words. "I'm finding my place, learning to be useful. That brings its own satisfaction." Jo nodded, poking at the small fire that warmed their shelter. "But it is not the life you envisioned when you traveled west." "No," Ellie admitted, "but few of us find exactly the life we envision. My father spent 30 years chasing a dream of wealth that always remained just beyond his reach. At least here, I can see the results of my efforts each day. Still, there must be things you miss." The gentle probe invited confidences Ellie hadn't expected to share. Yet in the intimate confines of their shelter, with darkness pressing close, outside, honesty seemed the only appropriate response. "I miss books," she said softly. "Reading was my escape when life in the mining camps became too harsh or monotonous. And I miss certain foods, fresh bread, apples in autumn, small comforts more than great luxuries." Jo was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. "What did you read in these books?" "Everything I could find. History, adventure tales, poetry." Ellie smiled at the memory. "My father thought it frivolous, but he indulged me anyway. Said an educated daughter was a father's pride, even if others didn't see the value in it. He was right in this." Jo's expression held genuine interest now. Knowledge, whatever its source, strengthens the mind as training strengthens the body. "What about you?" Ellie asked, emboldened by his openness. "What was it like at the white man's school? Did they let you read whatever you wanted?" A shadow crossed Jo's features. "No. They chose our reading carefully. The Bible, simple primers, texts that taught the virtues of white civilization and the savagery of our own ways." "And that must have been terrible," Ellie said, imagining the proud, independent man before her subjected to such treatment as a child. "It was difficult," Jo acknowledged. "But I learned to find knowledge even in texts meant to diminish me. I read between the lines, questioned what I was taught." A hint of satisfaction touched his lips, "And when the teachers weren't watching, I read other books. History, law, accounts of the outside world." "You were rebellious even then," Ellie observed with a small smile. "I preferred to think of it as resourceful." For the first time in their acquaintance, Jo's expression lightened into something approaching genuine amusement. "One teacher, the only kind one, saw what I was doing. Instead of punishing me, she slipped me more books. Said my mind was too sharp to waste on approved materials." This glimpse into Jo's past fascinated Ellie. She had known he was educated, of course. His command of English and understanding of white society made that obvious. But hearing him speak of his experience, his subtle resistance to the forces that sought to reshape him, revealed dimensions to his character she had only guessed at before. What happened to her, the kind teacher? Jo's expression sobered. She was dismissed when the superintendent discovered she had given me a copy of the Constitution. Apparently, teaching Indian children about rights was considered dangerous. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence after that, each lost in private thoughts. It was only later, as they prepared for sleep, that Ellie realized something significant had shifted between them. For the first time, they had spoken, not as reluctant allies bound by circumstance, but as two people genuinely interested in understanding each other. That night, Ellie slept more soundly than she had since arriving in the Hidden Valley. The following day brought an unexpected development. As Ellie worked with Kiona and other women preparing hides for winter clothing, a hunting party returned. Earlier than expected, their faces grave. Joe gathered the adults near the central fire, speaking rapidly in Apache. Though Ellie's grasp of the language had improved, she caught only fragments. Tracks, soldiers, danger. Takoda appeared at her side, offering translation. Hunters found army patrol signs less than a day's ride from here, he explained quietly. Not a large force, but moving in this direction. Ellie's heart sank. Do they think the patrol is tracking the band specifically or just scouting? Unclear, Takoda replied, but Joe takes no chances. He sends scouts to watch, warriors to prepare defenses. Tension gripped the camp as preparations were made for potential discovery. Women gathered children close, warriors checked weapons, and lookouts were posted on every approach to the valley. By nightfall, a sense of watchful waiting had settled over the community. In their wickiup, Joe was more withdrawn than usual, his mind clearly occupied with strategies and contingencies. Ellie gave him space, understanding the weight of responsibility he carried for every life in the camp. Is there anything I can do to help? She finally asked, as the silence stretched between them. Joe looked up, seeming to fully notice her presence for the first time that evening. You should prepare to leave if necessary, he said, his voice deliberately neutral. If soldiers come, it would be better if you were not found among us. The implications stung more than Ellie expected. You think I would abandon your people, return to the whites who would harm you? No. Joe's immediate, emphatic denial surprised her. But you have a choice that my people do not. You could claim you were held against your will. Return to your own kind without the taint of having gone native. Start again somewhere new. That's not what I want, Ellie said firmly. My place is here now for better or worse. Joe studied her face in the flickering firelight, searching for something. Doubt, perhaps, or fear. Finding neither, he nodded slowly. Then we face whatever comes together. He hesitated, then added more softly, Thank you, Eleanor. The simple expression of gratitude carried more weight than elaborate declarations might have. In that moment, Ellie realized that their arrangement, practical, born of necessity, had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a true partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. 3 tense days passed with no sign of the patrol. Scouts reported the soldiers had veered westward, following a false trail Joe had ordered, laid before their arrival in the valley. The immediate danger receded, but its shadow remained, a reminder of the precarious nature of their sanctuary. As winter deepened, life in the Hidden Valley settled into new rhythms. Game grew scarcer, requiring the hunters to range farther afield. Cold intensified, bringing storms that confined everyone to shelters for days at a time. These conditions tested not just physical endurance, but emotional resilience as well. During one particularly brutal blizzard, Ellie found herself confined to the wickiup with Joe for nearly 3 days straight. The enforced proximity could have been awkward, even tense. Instead, it became an unexpected opportunity for connection. With nowhere to go and little to do beyond maintaining their small fire, they began to talk, really talk, about their lives, their pasts, their hopes and fears. Joe spoke of his childhood before the white man's school, of traditions now fading, of his struggle to lead a people caught between worlds. Ellie shared stories of growing up in mining camps, of her father's endless optimism despite repeated disappointments, of her own dreams of stability and purpose. "I used to imagine having a little shop somewhere," she confessed as they shared a meager supper on the second evening of their confinement. "Nothing grand, just a place to sell remedies and tonics like my grandmother taught me to make. Somewhere people would come not just for medicine, but for advice, for a kind word." "That is still possible," Joe said, surprising her. "Not now, perhaps, but someday, when things change for my people, when we find our place in this new world." The casual inclusion of her future with his people's future didn't escape Ellie's notice. Their marriage, begun as temporary protection, was gradually assuming a more permanent character in both their minds. On the third day, as howling winds rattled their shelter and snow piled high outside, Joe asked the question that had clearly been on his mind since their first meeting. "The gold in your coat," he said quietly. "That is why you guard it so carefully, yes?" Ellie froze, her hands stilling on the moccasin she had been repairing. "You knew?" "I suspected from the beginning. The weight of it, the way you always keep it close. Then I became certain when you nearly fell, saving the elder. I caught your coat, felt the hardness beneath the fabric." There was no accusation in his tone, only calm observation. Still, Ellie felt a wave of guilt for having kept this secret, even as she shared other confidences. "It was my father's legacy," she admitted. "Everything he managed to save from his last claim. He sewed it into my clothes before he died, said it was the only way a woman alone could transport such wealth safely." Joe nodded, unsurprised. "A wise precaution. There are many who would kill for less. It was meant to secure my future, to give me options beyond depending on a husband's charity." Ellie met his eyes directly. "I didn't tell you because, well, at first I didn't know if I could trust you. Then later it seemed unimportant compared to immediate survival." "You were right to be cautious," Joe said, with no hint of offense. "Trust must be earned, not assumed." His understanding eased Ellie's conscience. "I should have told you once. I knew you better," she acknowledged, "after you proved yourself trustworthy many times over." "Perhaps. But secrets become habits, especially for those who have learned life's harsher lessons." Joe's expression remained thoughtful. "What will you do with this gold now?" It was a question Ellie had pondered often during quiet moments. The gold represented security, independence, possibilities, yet it remained useless while she was living among the Apache, hidden away from the world where such currency held value. "I don't know," she admitted. "It seems almost meaningless. Here, where survival depends on skills and community rather than money. Yet I can't help thinking it might someday serve a purpose. For me, for us, for your people." "Us." Joe repeated the word softly, testing its weight. "You begin to think of our arrangement as permanent then?" Heat rose to Ellie's cheeks. I didn't mean to presume. Our marriage was meant as a solution to an immediate problem, not a lifetime commitment. And if I wished it to be more?" The question hung in the air between them, fraught with possibilities neither had openly acknowledged until this moment. Before Ellie could formulate a response, a shout from outside interrupted them. The storm had finally broken, and scouts were reporting movement at the valley's edge. Not soldiers this time, but a small group of Apache from another band, seeking shelter and alliance. The moment of personal revelation was lost in the subsequent flurry of activity. Joe was needed to welcome the newcomers and assess their situation, while Ellie joined Naylin in preparing food and medicine for the exhausted travelers. Yet something had changed between them, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. Though neither referred to that unfinished conversation in the days that followed, its echo lingered in small gestures, Joe's hand lingering briefly on hers when passing. Something, Ellie, arranging his sleeping furs with special care, shared glances that held meaning beyond words. The newcomers brought both welcome companionship and troubling news. The army had intensified its efforts to round up renegade Apache bands, offering rewards to settlers and rival tribes for information leading to captures. Several small groups had already been forced onto the reservation, where conditions were deteriorating as promised supplies failed to materialize. "They starve our people into submission," the leader of the new group, a warrior named Ashki, told Joe during a council meeting. "Then blame us when some leave to hunt, calling them deserters who forfeit protection." Ellie, now included in such gatherings as Joe's wife, observed the grim faces around the circle as this information was absorbed. The reality of their situation, momentarily softened by the sanctuary of the Hidden Valley, reasserted itself with brutal clarity. They were not just hiding, they were fighting for cultural survival against forces determined to erase their way of life. "What of the settlers?" Joe asked. "Do they still press into our hunting grounds to the east?" Ashki nodded. "More come each month. They build cabins, clear land for planting when spring comes. The silver mine has new owners who promise rich strikes." The mention of Silver Creek sent an unexpected pang through Ellie. Though her brief time there had been largely unpleasant, it represented her last connection to the world she had known. For a fleeting moment, she wondered what had become of Franklin Pierce and his sister, of the sheriff who had witnessed her unconventional marriage, of the stagecoach driver who had first welcomed her to the frontier town. Did they think her dead, lost in the blizzard, or had they somehow learned of her fate among the Apache? The latter possibility raised concerns she hadn't previously considered. If Franklin knew she was alive, living as an Apache chief's wife, would his wounded pride drive him to inform the authorities? Joe seemed to read her thoughts. "You worry about the storekeeper," he observed quietly as they walked back to their wickiup after the council dispersed. "You fear he may have spoken of you to the soldiers." "Is it that obvious?" Ellie asked, surprised by his perception. "To me, yes. Your face shows your thoughts more clearly than you realize." There was no criticism in his tone, only gentle observation. "Pierce is a concern, but a minor one. The army has larger motives than finding one white woman. Still, I hate to think I might have brought additional danger to your people." Joe shook his head. "You did not choose this situation, Eleanor. None of us did. We face what comes with the strength we have. Together." Together. The word carried deeper resonance now, reinforced by their interrupted conversation during the blizzard. Were they truly becoming a couple in more than name? The possibility both thrilled and terrified Ellie. Her practical arrangement with Joe had evolved into something far more complex. Respect, partnership, and now perhaps the first stirrings of genuine affection. That night, as they prepared for sleep in their wickiup, Joe broke their usual pattern by settling his sleeping furs closer to hers. Not touching, but near enough that his presence felt like a protective embrace rather than a formal accommodation. "Is this acceptable?" he asked, his voice low in the darkness. "Yes," Ellie replied, surprised by how naturally the answer came. "More than acceptable." Joe reached out slowly, his hand finding hers in the space between them. His fingers were warm, calloused from hard work, yet gentle as they entwined with hers. Neither spoke, but in that simple touch, something profound was acknowledged. Their marriage, begun as necessity, had become choice. They fell asleep that way, hands joined, a small but significant bridge across the cultural divide that had initially separated them. Morning brought new responsibilities as the camp adjusted to accommodate the newcomers. Space was limited, resources stretched thin, but the Apache shared without complaint, understanding that survival depended on mutual support. Ellie found herself working alongside the women from Ashki's group, teaching them the medicinal preparations she had learned from Naylin, while learning new techniques from them in return. The exchange created bonds that transcended her status as an outsider, reinforcing her growing place within the community. As days passed, the most immediate concerns, shelter, food, security, were addressed, allowing attention to turn toward longer-term planning. Joe spent long hours with Ashkey and other tribal leaders discussing options for the coming spring. Though they included Ellie in many of these conversations, certain discussions occurred in Apache too rapid and complex for her still developing language skills to follow. On one such occasion, she excused herself to check on the children, only to encounter Nanto just outside the council wickiup. His expression suggested he had been waiting for her. "They debate whether to send messengers to other bands," he said without preamble, seeking allies for the difficult time ahead. Ellie was startled, both by his decision to share this information and by the implicit acknowledgement that she deserved to know. "Thank you for telling me," she said carefully. "Joe doesn't always translate everything. He protects you from hard truths." Nanto's scarred face betrayed little emotion. "But you are stronger than he believes." The unexpected compliment caught Ellie off guard. "What are these hard truths he shields me from?" Nanto glanced toward the council wickiup. "That spring brings not just renewal, but danger. That the army will not stop searching. That our people face 3 choices: surrender to the reservation, fight and likely die, or flee north to wild lands where white men have not yet claimed every valley." The starkness of these options hit Ellie with physical force. She had known their situation was precarious, of course, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made the reality inescapable. "And which option does Joe favor?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "He says little, listens much, but his heart rejects surrender." Nanto studied her face. "You must ask yourself, Eleanor Blackhawk, which path you will walk when the time comes. Your husband commands respect, but he cannot decide your fate." With that cryptic statement, he moved past her toward the center of camp, leaving Ellie to ponder his words. Was Nanto suggesting she might choose differently than Joe when spring forced their hand? That her loyalty might falter when tested by the harsh realities facing the Apache? The implications stung, yet Ellie couldn't entirely dismiss it. She had committed herself to this life, to these people, to Joe. But she was still a white woman in a world increasingly defined by the division between white and Indian. Could she truly stand against her own kind if conflict came? Would she be accepted among the Apache if they were forced to flee to even more remote territories? These questions weighed on her mind as she went about her daily tasks. That evening, when she and Joe were finally alone, she broached the subject directly. "Nanto told me about the council's discussions," she began, watching Joe's reaction carefully, "about the choices facing your people come spring." Something like resignation crossed Joe's features. "Nanto speaks too freely. These matters are not yet decided." "But they concern me too," Ellie pressed. "As your wife, as part of this community now, I should know what future we're planning for." Joe was silent for a long moment, studying the small fire between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was weighted with the responsibility he carried. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I have tried to shield you from the harshest realities. That was wrong of me." "I'm not as fragile as you think," Ellie said gently. "No, you are not." A ghost of a smile touched Joe's lips. "You have proven that many times over." He sighed, running a hand through his long hair. "The truth is, we face impossible choices. The reservation means slow death, disease, dependence, the loss of our ways. Fighting means quick death against superior forces. Fleeing north means hardship, hunger, and no guarantee of finding sanctuary." "And what do you think is the right choice?" Ellie asked, genuinely wanting to understand his perspective before offering her own. Joe's gaze met hers directly. I think there is no right choice, only the one that allows the most of our people to survive with some shred of dignity intact." He hesitated, then added more softly, "But such a path may not be one you wish to walk, Eleanor, and I would not blame you for that." The unspoken question hung between them. When the moment of decision came, would she remain by his side, or would she return to the relative safety of white society? "I made my choice when I accepted your offer of marriage," Ellie said firmly. "I didn't fully understand what that meant then, but I do now. Whatever path you and your people take, I'll walk it with you." Something in Joe's expression shifted, tension releasing, replaced by a warmth that transformed his usually stoic features. Without words, he moved to sit beside her, his arm encircling her shoulders in a gesture more intimate than any they had yet shared. Ellie leaned into him, finding comfort in his solid presence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. No longer just allies of convenience, but partners by choice. In that moment of quiet connection, the gold sewn into her coat seemed suddenly less significant. True wealth, she was learning, couldn't be measured in nuggets or coins, but in trust freely given, in belonging earned through shared struggle, in the strength found when walking alongside those who valued you for yourself rather than what you could provide. As Joe's arm tightened around her, drawing her closer to his warmth, Ellie realized that for the first time since her father's death, she had found not just security, but something far more precious. A place where she was truly needed, truly respected, perhaps even truly loved. Spring arrived in the hidden valley, not with a gentle awakening, but with urgent warnings. The scouts returned with troubling news. Cavalry patrols were converging on the region, systematically searching every canyon and hollow. Their sanctuary would not remain secret much longer. 3 days, Joe told the assembled band, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. That is how long we have before they find this valley. Ellie stood at his side, no longer relegated to the margins, but acknowledged as his true partner. The months of winter had transformed their relationship, deepening it from arrangement to authentic bond. Now, as they faced their greatest challenge yet, that bond would be tested. "We must decide tonight," Joe continued. "Tomorrow, we begin whichever path we choose." The council deliberations lasted well into the night. Arguments flared and subsided as different voices advocated for different approaches. Surrender to the reservation, fight against impossible odds, flee northward toward rumored sanctuary in the mountains. Each option carried its own dangers, its own sacrifices. Through it all, Joe listened more than he spoke, weighing each perspective, with the care of a leader who understood that lives hung on his judgment. Only when the fire had burned low and voices had grown hoarse did he finally stand to deliver his decision. "We will not surrender," he began, his voice carrying in the hushed silence. "Nor will we throw our lives away in pointless battle." His gaze swept the circle, meeting each pair of eyes. "We will divide our strength. The strongest warriors will create a false trail leading west, drawing the soldiers away. The rest, our families, our future, will move north, swift and silent." Murmurs of discussion followed this pronouncement. It was a strategy with merit, but also with significant risk. The diversionary group would face grave danger. "I will lead the warriors," Joe concluded. "Takoda will guide the main group north." Ellie felt her heart constrict at his words. She had known somehow that this would be his choice, to place himself in the position of greatest peril to protect his people. It was the essence of who he was, this willingness to sacrifice himself for the greater good. She loved him for it, even as she feared for his safety. When the council dispersed to prepare for the morning's departure, Ellie and Joe returned to their wiki-up in silence. The decision had been made, the path chosen. Now they faced a more personal reckoning. "You should go with Takoda's group," Joe said as they entered their small shelter. "They will need your healing skills." "And you?" Ellie countered. "Who will tend your wounds if the soldiers catch up to you?" A ghost of a smile touched Joe's lips. "We do not intend to be caught. Intentions and outcomes aren't always aligned." Ellie moved closer, her hand reaching for his. "I should be with you." Joe's fingers closed around hers, his grip firm yet gentle. "No. The diversion will be dangerous. We will ride hard, leave obvious signs, draw the soldiers into pursuit. Those with Takoda must travel carefully, leaving no trace." His free hand rose to touch her cheek. "And I need to know you are safe." The simple admission that her safety mattered to him, that he needed the reassurance of knowing she was protected, spoke volumes about how far they had come. This was no longer about practicality or tribal acceptance. This was about a man who couldn't bear the thought of harm coming to the woman he had grown to love. "I can't lose you," Ellie whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. "Not now. Not when we've only just found each other." Joe drew her into his embrace, his arms encircling her with a tenderness that belied his warrior's strength. "You will not lose me," he promised. "I will find you again when it is safe. This, I swear." They held each other in the flickering firelight, saying with touch what words could not fully express. The night passed too quickly, each moment precious with the knowledge of imminent separation. Dawn broke clear and cold, the kind of pristine spring morning that seemed to mock the gravity of their situation. The camp was a flurry of activity as final preparations were made. Warriors readied horses and weapons, while families gathered the barest essentials for the journey north. Ellie worked alongside Naylin, preparing medicine bundles for both groups. The old woman's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her eyes held a sorrowful knowledge. She had lived through many such partings, had seen too many warriors ride, away never to return. "You fear for him," she said in her improved English, glancing at Ellie's troubled face. "Yes." There seemed no point in denial. Naylin nodded, her weathered features softening with compassion. "Good fear means true heart." She pressed a small leather pouch into Ellie's palm. "For Joe, protection medicine, old ways, strong ways." Touched by the gesture, Ellie closed her fingers around the offering. "Thank you, I'll make sure he takes it." As the moment of departure approached, Ellie sought out Joe among the warriors. He stood somewhat apart, giving final instructions to Takoda about the northern route. Seeing her approach, the two men exchanged a meaningful glance before Takoda discreetly withdrew. "It's time, isn't it?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. Joe nodded, his expression composed but his eyes revealing the emotion beneath. "The warriors leave now. Your group follows in 1 hour, taking a different path." He reached out, his hands closing gently around her shoulders. "Remember everything Takoda taught you about moving without trace. Stay within the group. Help Naylin. With the children." "I will," Ellie promised. "And you, be careful, don't take unnecessary risks." She pressed Naylin's medicine pouch into his hand. "Take this for protection." Joe accepted the small bundle, tucking it inside his shirt close to his heart. Then, with deliberate movements, he reached into his own pouch and withdrew something that gleamed in the morning light. "For you," he said, placing the object in her palm. Ellie looked down to find a pendant, a small piece of polished turquoise wrapped in intricate silver wire. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the stone's deep blue reminiscent of the sky after a storm. "It belonged to my mother," Joe explained softly. "The stone is for protection, the silver for strength. She would want you to have it now." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes as she recognized the significance of such a gift. This was no token trinket, but a family heirloom, a connection to Joe's past and a promise for their future. "I'll treasure it," she whispered, slipping the leather cord over her. "Head so the pendant rested against her heart, and I'll be waiting when you find us." Joe drew her close one last time, his embrace conveying all the things left unsaid between them. When he finally released her, his expression had shifted to the resolute focus of a warrior preparing for battle. "Until we meet again, Eleanor Blackhawk," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that belied the ceremonial tone. "Until then," she echoed, forcing strength into her voice. She didn't watch him ride away. Instead, at his request, she joined Naylin in preparing the children for their journey, focusing her attention on practical tasks rather than the hollow ache in her chest. There would be time for worry later. Now was the time for action, for putting into practice all she had learned during her months with the Apache. An hour later, Dakota gave the signal to move out. The remaining members of the band, mostly women, children, and elders, with just a handful of warriors for protection, began their careful journey northward. They traveled in scattered groups of 3 or 4, leaving minimal trace of their passage, using every technique developed over generations to move unseen through the landscape. Ellie walked with Naylin and 2 of the youngest children, her senses heightened to every sound, every movement around them. The pendant hung warm against her skin, a constant reminder of Joe and his promise to return. The first day passed without incident, each small group making steady progress toward the distant mountains that marked their destination. They camped separately that night, sheltering in natural alcoves or beneath overhanging rocks, lighting no fires despite the lingering cold of early spring. As Ellie settled the exhausted children for sleep, Dakota appeared silently beside her, his expression grave. "Patrol spotted to the west," he murmured. "Moving fast. Joe's diversion works." Relief mingled with renewed concern in Ellie's heart. The diversion was succeeding, but at what cost to Joe and his warriors? Were they still ahead of their pursuers, or had there already been confrontation? "Tomorrow, we cross open ground," Dakota continued. "Most dangerous part of journey. Stay low. Move only when I signal." Ellie nodded, understanding the gravity of his warning. The open plateau ahead would leave them exposed, vulnerable to discovery if any patrols happened to be nearby. Their safety depended entirely on speed, stealth, and the success of Joe's diversion in drawing attention elsewhere. That night, as the children slept beside her, Ellie found herself thinking of Franklin Pierce and Silver Creek. It seemed a lifetime ago that she had arrived there, a mail-order bride with hidden gold and cautious hopes. How different her life had become in just a few months, and how much stronger she had grown through adversity. The gold still remained, sewn into her coat, which was now rolled as her pillow. Once, it had represented everything she desired: security, independence, a future she could control. Now it seemed almost insignificant compared to the deeper wealth she had found: community, purpose, and love she had never expected to discover. Yet as dawn approached, bringing with it the challenge of the exposed crossing, Ellie found herself considering the gold in a new light, not as her personal insurance, but as a potential resource for the entire band. If they reached safety in the north, established a new settlement beyond the army's reach, the gold could help secure supplies, trade goods, perhaps even land through unofficial channels. It could serve not just her future, but the future of the people who had become her family. This realization settled something within her. Whatever happened in the days ahead, whether Joe returned safely or not, her path was clear. She was no longer caught between worlds. She had chosen her place, and it was with these people who had accepted her despite every reason for distrust. The crossing began at first light, each small group waiting for Dakota's signal before darting across the open ground to the relative safety of scattered boulders. Ellie moved with the children, teaching them through example to stay low, to pause frequently, to blend with their surroundings as much as possible. They were halfway across the exposed area when disaster struck. A flash of sunlight on metal, in the distance, a reflection from a soldier's equipment. The patrol was not to the west as they had believed, but directly in their path, emerging from a hidden draw in the land. Takoda's urgent signal froze them in place. Movement now would only draw attention. Their only hope was to remain absolutely still and pray the patrol would pass without spotting them. Heart pounding, Ellie gathered the children close, silently willing them to understand the need for perfect silence. The small boy in her arms trembled, his wide eyes fixed on her face, trusting her to keep him safe. The patrol drew closer, 8 riders moving at a steady pace across the plateau. They weren't searching actively, which suggested they hadn't spotted any of the Apache yet, but their course would bring them within 100 yards of Ellie's position, close enough to notice movement if anyone panicked. Time stretched as they waited, each second an eternity of held breath and silent prayer. 50 yards, 30. The patrol leader signaled a brief halt, surveying the landscape with field glasses. Ellie felt sweat trickle down her spine, despite the cool morning air. Then, just as it seemed discovery was inevitable, gunfire erupted in the distance. The sound carried clearly across the open land, a familiar pattern that Ellie recognized. Immediately, Apache rifles firing in the coordinated sequence Joe had taught his warriors. The diversion. The patrol leader snapped to attention, barking orders to his men. Within moments, they had wheeled their mounts toward the sound of gunfire and were galloping away, dust rising in their wake. Ellie released the breath she'd been holding, murmuring reassurance to the frightened children. Joe had saved them again, drawing danger away at what might be terrible cost to himself and his warriors. Takoda wasted no time, signaling for all. Groups to move quickly now, using the patrol's distraction to clear the exposed ground. They reached the shelter of the foothills by midday, pushing deeper into the mountain terrain where cavalry horses would struggle to follow. That night, gathered in the relative safety of a hidden canyon, Takoda addressed the band. "We are 4 days from the northern valley," he explained. "The way ahead is difficult, but safer. Few patrols venture so far into these mountains." "What about Joe and the warriors?" someone asked. "Will they follow?" Takoda's expression remained carefully neutral. "If they can, they will find us. Joe knows the meeting place." He didn't voice the alternative that hung heavy in everyone's thoughts, that Joe and his warriors might not have survived their encounter with the cavalry. Ellie touched the turquoise pendant, drawing strength from its connection to Joe. He had survived impossible odds before. He would find a way back to them, to her. She had to believe that. The days that followed tested even the hardiest among them. The mountain paths were treacherous, food scarce, the nights bitterly cold as they climbed higher into the wilderness. Yet the band persevered, driven by the promise of sanctuary ahead and the growing distance from their pursuers. On the 4th day, just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, they crested a final ridge and beheld their destination. The northern valley spread below them, a hidden paradise of meadows fed by mountain streams, forests rich with game, and natural caves offering immediate shelter. "We have arrived," Takoda announced simply, but the triumph in his voice was unmistakable. As the band descended gratefully toward their new home, Ellie lingered on the ridge, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of riders approaching from the south. Nothing moved in the vast landscape except wind through early spring grasses. "He will come," Naylin said, appearing silently beside her. "Strong heart finds way home." Ellie nodded, wanting desperately to believe the old woman's confidence. "Yes," she said softly. "He promised." Together, they turned toward the valley, toward the future that awaited, whatever it might hold. 3 days passed as the band began establishing their new settlement. Shelters were constructed, hunting, parties brought in fresh game, and a sense of cautious optimism took root. They had escaped the immediate danger, found a place where they might begin anew. Ellie threw herself into the work, using physical exhaustion to keep worry at bay. By day, she helped build wiki-ups, gathered early spring plants for nail-ins, medicines, and taught the children English words as they worked alongside her. By night, she found herself drawn repeatedly to the southern ridge, watching and waiting despite the growing fear in her heart. On the fourth evening, as twilight settled over the valley, Ellie made her usual solitary journey to the lookout point. The turquoise pendant felt heavy against her skin as she settled on a flat rock, her eyes straining to penetrate the gathering darkness. "You are very faithful in your watching." The voice behind her sent Ellie spinning around, her heart lurching painfully in her chest. Joe stood there, thinner and more weathered than when they had parted, a fresh scar marking his forearm, but wonderfully, impossibly alive. Joe. She was on her feet and in his arms before conscious thought could form, her body recognizing what her mind was still struggling to comprehend. He was here, he had returned. His arms tightened around her, his face buried in her hair. For long moments they simply held each other, no words needed to express the relief and joy of reunion. When they finally drew apart, just far enough to see each other's faces in the fading light, Joe's expression held a quiet wonder. "You waited," he said simply. "Of course I waited." Ellie touched his face, reassuring herself of his solid presence. "I knew you would find us." A smile transformed his features, softening the lines of hardship and struggle. "I followed my heart," he said softly. "It led me to you." As stars appeared in the darkening sky above them, Ellie and Joe remained on the ridge, sharing the tale of their separated journeys. His warriors had successfully drawn the cavalry away, engaging in brief skirmishes before disappearing into terrain too difficult for horses. They had suffered wounds, but no losses, regrouping before making their way north by a circuitous route to avoid leading enemies to the new settlement. "And now?" Ellie asked when his story was complete. "What happens next for your people, for us?" Joe's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Now we build something new, not just survival, but a future." He looked out over the valley, where pinpricks of firelight marked their fledgling community. "It will not be easy, but we face it together." Ellie leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Together," she agreed. Then, reaching into her coat, she extracted a small pouch, the first of the gold she had carefully removed from its hiding place. "And we won't be starting with nothing." Joe's eyes widened as he realized what she was offering. "Eleanor, that is your security. Our security," she corrected gently. "Our future. The band's future." She pressed the pouch into his hand. "My father spent his life searching for gold, convinced it would bring happiness. In the end, what mattered wasn't the gold itself, but what it represented. The chance to build something meaningful." Understanding dawned in Joe's expression as he accepted her gift, not just the physical gold, but the trust and commitment it symbolized. "This will help secure trade goods, perhaps even official recognition for this land." "Exactly." Ellie smiled, a weight lifting from her shoulders as she shared the secret she had guarded for so long. "There's more hidden in the coat, enough to make a real difference for everyone here." Joe shook his head in wonder. "You continue to surprise me, Eleanor Blackhawk." "Good," she replied, her smile widening. "I intend to keep doing so for many years to come." As night fully claimed the mountain wilderness, they made their way down to the valley together, returning to the community that awaited them. No longer a mail-order bride with hidden gold, no longer an Apache chief with divided loyalties, but partners who had found their worth in each other and their shared vision for the future. Behind them, the stars glittered like gold dust scattered across the vast Montana sky, bearing witness to promises kept and new beginnings forged in the crucible of adversity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.